Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the buttoned-up, cologne-drenched existence of a Victorian man of means. You're not labouring in a factory, not lounging in an estate as nobility, and certainly not penning scandalous verse like those bohemian types. You're proper, solidly middle to upper class, the kind of fellow whose footwear gleams before dawn breaks, whose necktie folds with diplomatic precision, and whose morning routines follow such exacting standards they could have been written by Her Majesty. Here's the wild part. Before you've even tasted your morning tea, you've already broken 6 rules of proper conduct. First, you didn't wake before 6 o'clock. Second, your water for shaving wasn't piping hot. Third, you grabbed the wrong end of your towel. And fourth, fifth, and sixth, we'll circle back to those. Now, before we go any further, hit that like button and subscribe if you feel so inclined, only if your instincts tell you to. Drop a comment letting me know. What's your location? What hour is it where you are? I get a kick out of seeing folks from sleepy time zones gathering here. Kill the overhead lights, switch on that fan for some ambient noise, and let's ease into tonight's little journey. It begins with a noise, a gentle rap at your bedroom door. Then the whisper of shined boots across wood floors as your manservant enters carefully. He's balancing the shaving bowl, ceramic, chilled and brimming with water that's either boiling or icy. There's no middle ground. You sit upright stiffly, careful not to disturb the pillow because wrinkled bedding suggests troubled sleep, and troubled sleep suggests an uneasy conscience. Victorian culture doesn't announce this explicitly, but everything, down to your pillow, serves as a testament to your character. Onto the bowl, you peer into the shaving glass. It's fogged up. Naturally, it is. A proper man's mirror shouldn't show too much clarity. Excessive self-regard is unseemly. You work up a lather using soap crafted from animal fat and ash, harsh stuff that burns a bit. One small cut, and your entire day carries the scent of styptic powder and disappointment. Blade in your grip, you undertake the morning's initial challenge. Can you navigate your jawline without wincing? The tension isn't just from the sharp edge. It comes from the lineage of disapproving fathers and critical relatives who maintain that a cleanly shaven face reveals a disciplined character. And now we hit error number 4. You neglected to oil your razor the previous evening. A proper gentleman never overlooks the oil, not for the blade's sake, but because such lapses indicate mental disorganization. And disorganization spells trouble. While you rinse, your attendant presents the towel. Not the bathing towel. Absolutely not. That's for kitchen staff. You employ the face cloth, embroidered with your initials, stitched by your mother's seamstress on her wedding day. Or perhaps it was the parlour maid? Regardless, it carries sentimental weight. And sentimentality in measured proper doses gets a pass. Prior to the morning meal, you pat, never wipe. Wiping shows too much force. Patting demonstrates self-control, discipline, gentlemanly character. And on the subject of self-control, let's discuss what's forbidden. You can't do any stretching. That's animalistic behaviour. You can't yawn openly without shielding your mouth using a handkerchief embroidered with your monogram. Heaven forbid anyone glimpses your back teeth. You absolutely can't scratch anywhere south of your ribs. If something itches, you endure it. That's what distinguishes you from common folk. You're allowed, though, to exhale quietly while perched on your bed's edge, gazing toward the mist. Victorian mist isn't merely atmospheric conditions, it's mood setting, and it lends your existence the appearance of significance, which is helpful considering you're forbidden from displaying genuine emotion. But let's get back to your real adversary, your physical form. The Victorian gentleman is meant to be intellect primarily, spirit secondarily, and flesh never. Yet here you find yourself, sleepy, partially shaved, and desperately needing to relieve yourself. But let's be direct. The chamber vessel must remain unspoken. It's there certainly, and the servant will handle it. But the less acknowledged, the better. In certain homes they refer to it as the morning vessel. In others, simply the item. This brings us to mistake number 5. You muttered something profane after stubbing your toe against the bed's frame. That's beyond impolite. it's crude. And showing crudeness before 7 in the morning, you might as well be a chimney cleaner. The 6th error is more nuanced. While standing, you released a soft moan. Audible indications of advancing age aren't acceptable until your firstborn son enters government service. While your attendant arranges your undergarments, linen underdrawers, woolen hosiery, and a pressed undershirt that feels like wearing official documentation, you remind yourself this is merely the start. You haven't even selected your vest yet, and fatigue has already set in. But that's the essence of it, isn't it? Victorian manhood isn't centred on ease. It's centred on perseverance. Quiet, starched and polished. Perseverance. The chill rises through the wooden planks as your feet make contact, and you swiftly slip into your indoor slippers. Soft hide, no fasteners, no embellishments. You never go barefoot, not even in privacy. A gentleman's feet must stay as concealed as his views on sewage improvement. You stand erect, not because your back is limber, but because hunching in nightclothes represents a character flaw. Even at your most exposed, you must appear like someone who possesses formal neckwear. Now arrives the scent ceremony. You open the compact cabinet mounted above the washstand and examine your choices. Bay rum, lavender essence, or citrus cologne. You select the lavender not from particular fondness, but because it's understated. Anything more pronounced might indicate continental leanings. Apply several drops behind your ears. You recall the manners guide your uncle presented you at 12 years old. A gentleman's fragrance mustn't announce his arrival. That same uncle succumbed to gout and obstinacy at 53. But his advice about scent persists like the lavender itself. Your attendant reappears carrying your boots, polished to mirror brightness. He gives you a look of satisfaction and you acknowledge it with a single nod. No verbal thanks, no conversation, simply the wordless recognition that you both comprehend the show is beginning. Below stairs, the household comes alive. Somewhere a housemaid tends the parlour hearth. Another presses the morning broadsheet. You walk down the staircase at precisely the correct tempo, neither rushed nor lazy, a controlled pace. Heel striking first, no bounding down like an eager hound. You're not eager, you are self-possessed. You step into the morning chamber. The draperies have already been opened, just sufficiently to admit softened daylight, but not so generously that direct sun could strike the carpet. Faded textiles are vulgar. Your chair at the breakfast setting is vacant. Naturally it is. It's perpetually vacant. Your father once instructed you a gentleman's seat exists wherever he calmly establishes it. The toast holder waits, maintaining its warmth. The eggs, softly boiled, never pan-fried, rest under a silver cover. The bacon lies crisp, but discreetly folded, preventing any appearance of grease, and the tea gets poured only after you're positioned. Nothing happens hastily. But before consuming anything, there's another tradition to observe. You open the Times, not for actual reading, goodness no, but for creating a barrier. It's a morning divider, an invisible boundary of newsprint. It communicates that you're physically present but mentally unavailable. The sole permissible interruption consists of a cough, an authentic one, delivered twice. Signals worry, 3 times signals dismissal. As you drink, you remember an odd regulation. A genuine gentleman never adds salt to his eggs. The reason? Because it suggests mistrust of the kitchen staff. And if your household cook represents anything, she's a powerful figure wielding cutlery and grudges. Beneath the surface of breakfast tranquility, there's subtle conflict. The housemaid refilling the cream pitcher stares too intently toward the window. She's probably been weeping. One of the manservants walks with a slight limp, likely dropped a serving tray the prior evening. You observe all of this, but remain silent. That's your function as a gentleman. You watch. Meddling is for Yankees. Now, your spouse, or potentially your mother, depending on your circumstances in this narrative. She appears, greeting you with a brief nod. Not an embrace, not a grin, just the unspoken agreement of coordinated schedules. She nibbles her toast with preserves, and you offer the morning's sole acceptable question. Did you rest? Notice not how well she rested. That's overly personal. Simply, did you? The response is nearly always adequately, which translates to either don't probe further or we're skirting something uncomfortable. The meal ends with a delicate chime rung by the head servant. It's not directed at you, it's for the kitchen staff, but you register it and you sense it. Every bell throughout the house whispers of the social mechanics that maintain you upright in this rigid chair, consuming tepid tea and pretending the preserves aren't slightly spoiled, and thus, having fulfilled the day's first major obligation, awakening, grooming, attiring yourself, and breakfasting, you stand, not with haste. You fold your serviette meticulously into quadrants. You rest it atop your dish, not alongside it. Alongside suggests amateurism, and you depart the chamber without backward glances because a gentleman consistently advances with poise, distance, and a subtle trace of lavender. You head back to your chamber to discover your attendant has commenced the morning's second most critical ceremony, layering you like a confection with multiple tiers. One shirt, nowhere near sufficient. Prior to breakfast, you donned the undergarments. Now arrives the complete uniform of respectability, each layer a thread in the social fabric. The coat you mustn't remove casually. He begins with the underdrawers, lengthy and baggy, constructed from rigid linen. They cause slight irritation, but insufficient to voice complaint. Then the stockings, wool, with stripes if you're feeling slightly daring, solid-coloured if you anticipate visitors. They're secured by garters that grip your lower legs, not from necessity, but because structure permits no looseness. Following that comes the undershirt, more linen, naturally rigid at the neckline, rigid at the wrists, rigid everywhere. The Victorians weren't celebrated for comfort. They were celebrated for restraint. You elevate your arms as your attendant raises the vest above your shoulders. It carries faint traces of mothballs and last Thursday's spirits, but it fastens cleanly and extends high, just beneath your throat. No accommodation for a protruding stomach. The stomach represents betrayal. Therefore the corset, that's correct. You, a mature man with perspectives on explosives, taxation and the Crimean conflict, wear a corset. Not for aesthetic purposes, understand, though it does cinch the midsection just sufficiently to preserve your dignified silhouette. No, this serves posture, erect spine, expanded chest, restrained contours. That's the profile of the ethical male. As your attendant tightens the laces, you don't react, you've mastered shallow breathing. Those who breathe deeply are fantasists, and fantasists become inadequate spouses. With that fastened, it's time for the outer shirt. The genuine shirt, not the undergarment. This one features a starched collar so acute it could slice through cured meat. Your neck already displays the pale red mark from yesterday's confrontation. With it, you slide it on like protective gear because that's its function. Nobody observes your inner thoughts, but they'll scrutinize your cuffs and they'd better sparkle. Now for the cravat, folded with greater exactness than typical architectural blueprints. There exist more than 30 acknowledged methods for tying a gentleman's cravat, each carrying its own message. The Oriental, excessively foreign. The mathematical, excessively fussy. The simple arrangement, somewhat common. You choose the male coach, appropriately solid, but not ostentatious. Your attendant folds, tucks, and secures with medical precision. One incorrect angle, and you'll resemble a revolutionary. You check your reflection. You're nearly somebody, but not completely yet. The vest, already worn, requires buttoning completely. Every fastener except the lowest. That one remains undone perpetually. Why? Because King Edward VII once neglected to fasten his. And rather than acknowledge a belly too stuffed with game bird, society adapted the standards. Now all gentlemen leave that final button open, an enduring homage to royal digestive excess. Above that goes your morning jacket, tailored to flatter, narrowing at the midsection and expanding subtly at the hips. The material is deep black, navy or charcoal, because colour presents risk. Too light, you're a poet. Too vibrant, a card player. Brown, God preserve you. Your attendant hands you your timepiece chain, which arcs from pocket to buttonhole with exact length and drape. Too slack and you appear careless. Too taut and you seem cheap. Either way, someone will take note. Then, the gloves. Suede, grey. You don't put them on, yet you transport them. Wearing gloves inside represents a blunder, but lacking gloves altogether. Social destruction. You're now wearing 5 visible layers. Factor in the corset and linen underneath and you're 6 layers thick. During summer, in a dwelling with coal heating and 0 air circulation. You're perspiring, but gently, properly, nearly imperceptibly, and you haven't even exited the chamber. Your attendant approaches bearing the finishing element, the tall hat. Not just any headwear, your hat. It has received careful brushing, lined internally with silk and preserved in a velvet container since last week's opera performance. You grasp it carefully, never contacting the top, solely the edge. Why? Because touching the crown creates unsightly fingerprints, and furthermore, it implies anxiety. A gentleman's hat shouldn't reveal his internal condition. You position it upon your head, at an exact angle, somewhat forward, never cocked. A rakish angle suggests you've participated in a fight, or worse, a theatrical production. At this point in your preparation, appearance serves as armour. Every crease, fibre and angle is orchestrated to declare, I fit here. You glance once more at the tall mirror. You observe what society demands you observe, a man of resources, regulation and quiet anguish. And then arrives the unexpected element. Sitting once again, you must now descend onto the preparation chair without disturbing anything. This requires technique. Drop too rapidly and your tails bunch awkwardly, too gradually and your cravat pin pierces your neck. You perform the movement like a man collapsing into a museum exhibit. Your attendant initiates the ritual known exclusively to servants and spirits, brushing. Even when your coat appears clean, he brushes it. The reason? Because brushing represents structure, and structure is your class's currency. The brush itself uses boar bristles stored in a mahogany container. With each stroke, particles are eliminated not merely from cloth, but from your social essence. You stay motionless, arms somewhat raised as though being preserved. Once complete, your attendant retreats soundlessly. No conversation. If he does vocalise, it must concern the atmospheric conditions or the horse droppings in the road. Nothing more intimate. You rise, newly sculpted, and observe yourself again in the glass. You cannot slump in this ensemble. You cannot inhale freely. You definitely cannot consume anything more substantial than a modest apple without risking a fastener catastrophe. But you are dressed, and that holds more significance than comfort. And so, with gloves in your grasp, you descend the stairs another time. The corridor carries faint traces of rose wax and nervousness. As you near the door, the head servant stands ready. He opens it exactly 4 seconds before you arrive at the doorway. Never prematurely, that would seem desperate, and never delayed, that would imply disorder. Before you venture outside, a final verification: hat, gloves, timepiece chain, handkerchief. Leather, left pocket. Compact notebook, right pocket. No bulging. Every fold flawless. Every detail unnoticeable to the untrained eye, but as obvious as percussion. To those who understand, because this is Victorian England, your ensemble isn't merely clothing, it's a statement of value. 6 layers of starched morality. 1 error, 1 crease, and the whole facade collapses. You're not dressing for ease. You're dressing for continued existence. Beyond the threshold, the mist hangs heavy. Horses clatter past. A youth hollers something crude in the distance. A gentleman disregards it. You enter the street as though you belong in artwork, because that's the expectation. Every moment of your morning has been governed by regulations that nobody will acknowledge you for honouring, but they'll definitely notice if you fail. And just as you commence your stroll, feet positioned exactly thus, chin raised to the appropriate moral elevation, you realise you've forgotten your walking cane. Well, better to struggle through society than appear unprepared. You drift into the breakfast chamber's vacant stillness, still reverberating in your consciousness. But now it's time for combat. A combat waged not with blades or declarations, but with toast tongs and fruit preserves. You understand, breakfast in your household isn't simply a meal. It's a demonstration of self-discipline, orchestrated down to the tiniest fragment. Everything positioned on the surface has a purpose. Everything you perform at that surface communicates volumes about your upbringing, your wealth, your emotional condition, and potentially even your marriage. You're under observation, not overtly, naturally, that would be vulgar, but in every lifted eyebrow and every butter blade that hesitates midway to the dish. Your head servant raises the silver covering with wordless ceremony. The selections: boiled eggs, merely one or two; toast, invariably cold; marmalade, sharp; sardines if it's Wednesday. The simple presence of spiced kidneys, that indicates visitors are anticipated or your spouse is feeling confrontational. You extend toward the toast holder, not the dish. This is significant. The dish would maintain the toast's warmth. Unacceptable. Warm toast suggests a rushed kitchen. A respectable household prepares toast early, allows it to cool completely, and displays it vertically in a metal frame like edible playing cards. The cold toast regulation isn't questioned. You don't question the crown, you don't question toast. You choose your slice using tongs, never bare hands, even in solitude. Particularly in solitude, because in Victorian culture the worst designation possible is ordinary. And contacting toast with uncovered hands, that's virtually French. Now, butter. The container is compact, ceramic, and moulded like a bovine. You excavate cautiously, not excessively deep, not excessively much. A gentleman never scrape audibly. You distribute the butter in circular motions, beginning from the middle, expanding outward like a social wave. Clumps are savage. If your toast rips, you maintain composure. Emotional response belongs in fiction. You drink your tea, Earl Grey or nothing else. It has been steeped not for flavour, but for custom. You grasp the cup using thumb and index finger, only the smallest finger, somewhat extended but not excessively. Too rigid and you're a parody, too casual and you're a brewer's offspring. Then it occurs. Your egg teeters. It sits in a silver holder, narrow at the base, appearing harmless. But one clumsy motion with a spoon and you'll fracture the shell too loudly. That sound, the dreaded crack, is jarring. Your spoon must tap gently, not strike. The shell should separate in clean, silent fragments, like peeling wallpaper. Within, the yolk remains somewhat liquid. The toast strips cut diagonally, invariably diagonally. Must dip only once. No swirling motion, no slurping. That would suggest enjoyment. Victorian breakfast isn't about enjoyment. It's about bearing. At the opposite end of the surface, someone, your aunt, your spouse, possibly your cousin, remarks something like, "It appears as though rain might come." This isn't meteorological commentary, it is cipher. It translates to, "Avoid bringing up politics," or "Let's pretend everything is fine," or "Even your headwear looks ridiculous," but you respond with a neutral, "Indeed, it does appear rather overcast," because the objective isn't to convey meaning, it is to preserve decorum. And regarding regulations, mercy help you if you try to consume something prohibited, like bananas. Indeed, bananas. Once shipped from Ceylon and Jamaica, the banana triggered a minor cultural crisis in the 1870s. The reason? Because nobody could reach consensus on how a gentleman should properly consume one. With cutlery, partially peeled manually, sectioned into a bowl and smothered with cream. Eventually, High society quietly prohibited bananas from the breakfast setting. Too provocative, too exotic, too chaotic. So you act as though you've never encountered them, like emotions or jazz music. You return your teacup to its saucer with rehearsed elegance. No audible contact, no trembling. The saucer itself is bone porcelain, hand-decorated, likely by someone in Staffordshire with deteriorating vision and 12 offspring. But none of that holds relevance now. What holds relevance is that your teaspoon rests perfectly parallel to the edge, not at an angle, not positioned inside the cup, as some uncivilized person might do. The dialogue, if you can label it that, progresses in gentle exchanges. Did you observe Lady Hewish's shrubbery? She's becoming careless. The Ashcrofts have arrived in town. Anticipate an uncomfortable dinner shortly. Every statement at breakfast contains dual significance, the spoken words and the quiet intervals between them. You must learn to interpret both. A genuine gentleman always recognizes when not to respond. You glance at the newspaper positioned neatly adjacent to your dish. It's not meant for reading, certainly not thoroughly. That would identify you as either peculiar or a member of Parliament. No, you scan the front page stories. You feign interest in maritime tariffs. You grimace at reports of turmoil in Bengal. You nod gravely at the phrase revenue relief, though you've never managed your own finances. The newspaper isn't intelligence, it's a theatrical device. And like all quality theatre, it must be manipulated with elegance. You rotate each sheet cautiously, like petting a feline that might detonate. As the clock approaches the quarter-hour mark, a subtle alarm develops. You have to finish your meal before that mantel clock strikes, or you'll look like someone with nothing better to do. Dawdling is reserved for those without jobs and those nursing ailments. You spread butter across one final wedge of toast, so thin it barely exists. Then fold your napkin into 3 sections, never 4. That happened moments ago at breakfast's conclusion. 3 folds are proper. Why? Because Queen Victoria folded hers that way after losing her husband, and society, in its boundless compliance, copied her exactly. A hushed method of mourning. One linen rectangle at a time. You rise. The chair legs drag against the floor softly, apologetically. You don't tuck it back in. That's work for the footman, assuming he's nearby. He's not. You act like you haven't noticed. At the threshold, you stop, not to think, but to allow someone else the chance to speak if they choose. They stay silent, so you continue down the corridor, your footsteps echoing faintly against the tile floor. Gloves rest in your palm. Your hat sits ready on its hook. Beyond the walls, a carriage passes by, its wheels hissing through yesterday's rainfall. You inhale deeply and catch coal dust mixed with self-control. There's a common belief that breakfast is the day's most critical meal. For the Victorian gentleman, it's the most perilous. Not because of what you're eating, not because of the organ meats, but because one mistake, one comment, too relaxed, one yawn, one crooked necktie, and your entire carefully constructed image could collapse. You've made it through this morning. Well done. But keep in mind, this was merely the beginning. Lunch remains hours ahead, and you're already worn out from the effort of seeming effortless. Somewhere deep inside, you crave toast you can actually feel, tea you can drink noisily, and a banana consumed like someone who isn't scared. But not this morning. This morning you embody perfect buttered decorum. You move through the doorway into the weak filtered sunlight of late morning. The mist holds onto the cobblestones like silk fabric nobody wants to disturb, and the atmosphere carries mixed scents of horse manure, roasting chestnuts and moist wool. But this isn't simply a stroll. Absolutely not. This is the daily promenade, the understood ceremony of every respectable Victorian gentleman. You're not travelling toward any specific destination. You're not running late for any appointment. But the way you walk, your chosen route, and who observes you walking might determine your future far more than any written reference. You straighten your gloves, soft, suede, intact stitching. No marks from last week's mishap with the leaking ink container. A gentleman never exits his home wearing damaged gloves. Better to go without them in winter, which naturally would also cause scandal. Your hat sits lightly on top of your carefully groomed hair. You give it a small downward adjustment, not a showy gesture, just a minor modification. Hat protocol is its own dialect, a gentle touch of the edge for a woman passing by. A more deliberate motion for someone of matching status. No recognition whatsoever for meat vendors or book dealers. Not from meanness, understand? Simply procedure. Your walking stick. Yes, you brought it after all. Taps against the stone in perfect sync with your footsteps. Not too quick, not too sluggish. Quick walking implies urgency, and urgency implies chaos. Sluggish walking implies sickness or pomposity. Both unacceptable. The proper Victorian tempo. Unhurried, yet deliberate, as if you're moving towards something significant, but without any rush to get there. A passing cab driver splashes through standing water and you execute a smooth sidestep without disrupting your rhythm. This matters enormously. You must never show reaction to your surroundings. A surprised leap, undignified. A profanity, outrageous. A damp trouser cuff. A minor cost for seeming unflappable. You acknowledge Mr. Pendlebury on the opposite side of the street. Upper echelon possesses 3-row houses. Once greeted Disraeli personally. He acknowledges you back. Barely, hardly noticeable. His cane has an ivory handle. Yours doesn't. These details count. You move past a store window and glimpse your reflection. Elevated, erect, controlled. You verify 3 things. Posture, pants, and hat positioning. All meet standards. You don't linger. Only merchants admire their own reflections. Now appears the challenge. Mrs. Litchfield, widow, dressed in purple, though technically still observing mourning, famous for unexpected greetings and even more unexpected inquiries. "Good morning, Mr. Insert, whatever surname applies to you," she announces. You lift your hat with rehearsed grace, not too elevated, not too minimal, just sufficient to communicate I notice you. I recognise you, but I'm not halting. She beams. She wishes to discuss hydrangeas or arthritis treatments or her nephew's poor behaviour at private school, but you provide the flawless exit. "Ah, Mrs. Litchfield, lovely to see you. Regrettably, I'm heading to the pharmacy, quite urgent." The standard excuse, you're not actually going, but nobody challenges a gentleman heading to the pharmacy. She nods, comprehending the signal. You return your hat to position, continue your walk and release a quiet breath of relief. That was narrow, because every instant outdoors is an evaluation of character. You're walking not merely through streets, but through a danger zone of silent expectations. You must look healthy, prosperous, virtuous and well-groomed, even if your footwear pinches and your undergarments dig into your ribcage. And most importantly, you must never stand around. Standing around in the Victorian perspective is not merely wasting time, it's a deterioration of character. Only vagrants, troublemakers and Americans stand around. You, on the other hand, promenade, which is completely distinct, even if it appears identical. The promenade carries on lengthy, measured, but never pointless. You move past the park railings, observing the gravel walkways and metal benches where women rest in layered garments like flowers in a botanical reference book. You don't gawk. A gentleman observes, he never gapes. One of them raises a parasol somewhat. Is it a message, a romantic gesture, a lighting effect? Safest to presume nothing and maintain your gaze ahead. Excessive eye contact might be interpreted as interest, insufficient as impoliteness. You choose the honourable middle ground, a momentary look, dignified and expressionless. Further ahead, a street child yells, "Paper, sir!" Controversy in Parliament. You don't react. You absolutely don't purchase a newspaper from a youngster in threadbare clothing. What would observers think? That you require gossip shouted at you like some ordinary clerk? Never. Your information comes at the morning table, folded and pressed. A dog barks beside your shoe. A scruffy terrier probably belonging to a fabric merchant. It's investigating your trousers. You suppress the impulse to shove it away. That would be crude, but you can't bend down to push it off either. So instead you stare not at the animal but at its owner until he rushes over with excessive apologies. You offer a partial smile, more raised eyebrow than lip movement. Pardon, gentleman fashion. Now the difficulty increases. You're nearing the square, the social centre of your neighbourhood. Women with gloves reaching their elbows, promenade moving clockwise, parasols rotating like gentle accusations. Gentlemen travel counterclockwise, gazes darting sideways for acquaintances, competitors, or someone to disregard. With accuracy, you notice Mr. Eldridge, offspring of a factory proprietor. He greets you with an exaggerated removal of his hat, slightly too theatrical. Recent wealth always forgets that restraint is valuable. You react with the slightest touch of your brim and the smallest head inclination, a lesson in minimal acknowledgement. You pass the tailor's establishment. In the display, a new necktie design, somewhat broader than current fashion permits. You examine it while moving. Will it become popular? Should you be premature? No. Allow someone else to appear ridiculous first. At the intersection, two elderly gentlemen occupy a bench, pretending to study newspapers but actually evaluating passing footwear. One leans closer and whispers something about someone's heel condition. The other snorts in concurrence. You ensure your souls stay hidden. Then catastrophe. A wind gust raises your coattails, both of them for one terrible instant. Your unbuttoned vest, edge flutters in the breeze. A woman inhales sharply. A man coughs. Somewhere a pigeon takes flight with condemnation. You recover naturally. Secure the coat back with one palm. Angle the hat downward. Quicken your speed just marginally. Not a sprint at the tempo of someone tardy for lunch. This incident will be recalled, but how it's recalled depends on your departure. You stabilise your gait, correct your backbone, and pass the produce seller without a look. By the time you turn the following corner, the coat-tail incident has transformed into an enigma, possibly even a tale of dignified recovery. You've completed the promenade, but understand this clearly. Every segment of your path was documented not by photography but by recollection, by Mrs. Litchfield's twitching lace curtain, by the footwear watching pensioners, by the tailor's assistant beyond the glass. Your shoes might be scuffed by tomorrow, your necktie might become outdated by next week, but right now you navigate the tightrope of gentlemanly conduct. And you haven't fallen, not currently. Yet you arrive home exactly at noon, not sooner, not afterward. Any sooner and you might seem unoccupied. Any afterward, and it implies your tasks have descended into disorder. A gentleman's time management is like his penmanship, tidy, somewhat understated, and evaluated mercilessly. Your boots come off at the entrance, not by your own hands, naturally. That would be improper. A quiet bootjack and a manservant wait in the entryway, prepared to accept your damp outer garments with the solemnity of a sacred ceremony. You enter your residence, house shoes still shined naturally, and adjust your necktie, which has acquired the slightest, almost undetectable tilt. It's now time for calling hour, that most hazardous segment of the Victorian gentleman's day. For the following 2 hours you might be required to welcome visitors, or even more challenging, make visits yourself, and here exists the peril. The complete system of refined society is controlled by a small piece of cardboard, the visiting card. You possess a collection of them in a silver container, initials pressed into the surface, edges flawlessly trimmed. Too substantial, and it broadcasts vanity. Too flimsy, and it resembles something from a merchant's ledger. Your name, Mr. Reginald P. Whatever else appears in modest cursive, lacking any showy titles unless you hold a baronetcy, and even then one must be humble about it. You accept the calling tray from the butler? Today's contributions. 4 cards, 2 gentlemen, 1 woman, and an unidentified monogrammed letter. You examine each one with surgical care, the 2 gentlemen mandatory responses, probably hoping for supper invitations or, even more challenging, assistance with your lawyer. The woman, a calculated reminder that you overlooked her Tuesday card, though you did spot her at the square. Acting like you didn't recognize your vest and the monogram, you squint. It's Mrs. E.T. Dashwell, not a name you anticipated. She hasn't visited in 3 months. Last you knew, she had gone to take the waters in Bath. Her reappearance now indicates gossip or financial problems or both. You turn the card gently, searching for corner signals. This is the hidden language of refined society. A card with the upper right corner bent means the individual delivered it personally. Upper left, sympathy. Lower left, celebration. Lower right, goodbye. A bent card in an envelope. Exceptionally formal, potentially a dual challenge, or even more challenging, a supper invitation. Mrs. Dashwell's card has no bend, meaning it arrived by servant informally. She anticipates your response within 48 hours, or she'll interpret it as an insult, or an indication you're sick, or even more challenging, financially troubled. You turn toward your writing table and retrieve your own tray. Inside, a clean stack of your cards, your finest fountain pen, and the feared red ledger. The record of social obligations. Every visit made or accepted must be documented, every visit reciprocated, every name paired with date, hour, purpose and result. It's part journal, part danger zone. You open the record to today's date and write, Dashwell. ET card accepted, no bend. Reciprocate visit by Thursday. Even at this moment you sense the tension mounting. Will you appear personally? Dispatch your manservant? Drop off a card with your butler? Each selection communicates something, whether you want it to or not. And you haven't even begun your own visits yet, because a gentleman must also visit, and heaven help you if you show up at the incorrect hour. You verify the time. Nearly noon. That means you're inside the sacred visiting window between noon and 3. Too soon, and you'll find your hosts unprepared. Too delayed, and you risk disrupting their digestion, or even more challenging, their solitude. You slide your silver container of visiting cards into your coat pocket. Fasten up, center button exclusively, naturally, and collect your hat. Today you'll be making 3 visits, not stays visits. Stays involve being seated. Visits are briefer, more rigid, and optimally finished in under 15 minutes. Just sufficient time to taste sherry, create polite sounds about someone's niece, and leave your presence on the furniture. Your initial destination is the Ashcrofts' residence. Recently wealthy, alarmingly decorated, but socially significant because Mrs. Ashcroft possesses a piano and understands how to use it strategically during supper gatherings. You reach the door, already practicing the facial arrangement. Cordial but not overly comfortable. Refined but not superior. Somewhere between I might sponsor a library and I'm acquainted with someone who deals in pearls. The door swings open. The butler materializes. Mr. Ashcroft is not accepting visitors. This is language. Either he's genuinely absent or he's concealing himself behind drapery with liquor and a dental problem. Doesn't matter. You nod gravely, extract your card container and withdraw one with the measured elegance of an experienced magician. You present the card, not push it, never thrust it onto the silver tray. One smooth motion. Then you pivot on your heel and exit without a sound. That's the proper method. An entire exchange without a syllable spoken. Your following destination is the Widow Pembroke. Her visiting hours are notoriously limited, exclusively between 12:45 and 1:15, and her parlour is filled with ticking timepieces, each 5 minutes offset. You reach just in time. The housemaid shows you in with a curtsy and a subtle odour of preserved onions. You nod. No comment about aroma. That would be cruel. The parlour is shadowy, overfilled, and carries the scent of dried lavender and aged silk. Widow Pembroke is positioned in a green wingback, one gloved hand placed on a volume of Milton. She doesn't stand, but tilts her head marginally. You remove your hat bow, not profoundly, and are directed to a chair not straight across from her, but somewhat off-axis. This is her method of reminding you she once danced with a gentleman duke. You converse about the climate, her felines, the recent deterioration in quality of mail. You both concur something must be accomplished, though neither of you proposes anything. She presents you with a biscuit. You refuse. The appropriate biscuit, plain, circular, unseasoned, exists exclusively to be rejected. Taking it would indicate hunger. Hunger indicates want. Want indicates a failure of discipline. At 13 minutes and 20 seconds you stand. Any longer and she might start to suspect fondness or ulterior motives. You express thanks briefly, with no embellishments, and leave. Another accomplished social display executed with all the warmth of a handwritten promissory note. Your last destination. The Everleys. You despise the Everleys. They are boisterous, recently wealthy, and their entrance smells of overly ripe oranges, but they possess a billiards table and 4 daughters, which makes them inescapable. You show up, deposit your card, refuse to step inside. You've accomplished enough today. At home, your butler accepts your coat and gloves. You breathe out. At last, you completed all your visits. You recalled everyone's card protocol. You documented everything in the ledger. And for what purpose? To be observed, to be discussed, to stay in circulation, but never genuinely included. In the Victorian reality, silence has a form. It's the dimensions of a visiting card, bent once in the corner, and it communicates everything. It's approaching 3 o'clock when you finally sink, metaphorically into the gentleman's refuge, the parlour, or, if you're fortunate, the smoking room. A location free from corseted small talk, lace-bordered decorations and the refined combat of social visits. But don't unwind just yet, because now starts the most dangerous performance of all. Conversation, not argument, not exchange, not genuine connection, but that distinctively Victorian style of refined emptiness, where men talk constantly without disclosing a single reality. You assume your position in the armchair that's unofficially yours. How do you recognise? Because nobody else ever occupies it, and when they do, everyone acts like they don't notice while judging them silently. You cross your legs, not too elevated, never ankle on knee. That's virtually American. Just the correct angle to indicate ease without recklessness. Mr. Talbot occupies the space across from you, rotating a brandy as if it's a fortune-telling device. You're familiar with Talbot. You've been acquainted since Eton. He once passed out at the sight of a squirrel, but now presents himself as a rugged colonialist. Next to him, Colonel Brimsby clears his throat, a man who has served in at least 3 campaigns, and yet cannot endure tepid soup. Substantial fog today, Talbot murmurs. You nod. Correct. Persistent. Brimsby contributes. They claim it's the coal residue mixing with ocean mist. This is daring, scientific, a dangerous choice. You answer cautiously. Perhaps, though I learned the barometer was misinterpreted. In Devon, that's more secure, ambiguous, agreeable. This is what qualifies as spirited discussion. No emotions, no politics, unless it's a criticism at foreign diplomacy. No discussion of finances, absolutely no reference to health, digestion, or marital dissatisfaction. These are the unwritten rules of male civility. Keep in mind, you're allowed 5 acceptable subjects. 1. The climate, always permissible. 2. The standard of port, never too passionate. 3. The shortcomings of public transportation. 4. Horses, actual or metaphorical. 5. The incompetence of junior personnel. You do not, under any situation, discuss your internal reality. No reflections, no verse, no sorrow, unless conveyed as disdain for continental trends. This isn't suppression, it's training. At least that's what the manuals claim. You attempt directing the conversation toward cricket, but Talbot responds with an unexpected comment about opera. Opera is hazardous ground. Too many vowels, too much sentiment. It's music that suggests longing, and longing has no position in a vest. So you redirect. Delicately, I believe the acoustics at Her Majesty's Theatre rather enhanced. Now you're secure once more, discussing about structures. Masonry has no emotions. Brimsby nods. Superior to that dreadful echo chamber they constructed near Holborn. The sound drips like weak broth. You taste your brandy, refined, faintly smoky, the variety meant to be valued, not relished. For an instant, silence descends, a substantial mutual pause. Nobody hurries to occupy it. Silence in this setting isn't uncomfortable, it's masculine. You're not expected to speak continuously. You're expected to project unspoken dominance. While gazing into the flames, someone stirs a sugar cube into tea. The small clink resonates like a bell tower. Disturbing information from the colonies, Talbot declares eventually. You all nod once more, not because you're aware of the information, but because the word disturbing is the ideal prompt to appear knowledgeable. Absolutely, you respond, and allow the silence settle again like a glove over the heart you're never allowed to reveal. The flames crackle quietly, its illumination reflected in the brass fender. You recline marginally backward, never slump, and permit your eyes to rest but not shut. Shut eyes indicate weakness, and though you're among companions, you must still remain a figure of authority. Someone speaks. Did you learn about Jenkins? Ah, Jenkins. He's absent from the room, which means he's acceptable target. Sent his offspring to study Greek. The voice persists. A ripple of disapproval moves around the chairs. Not because Greek is outrageous, but because it indicates idealism. Idealism creates thinking. Thinking creates writing. Writing creates problems. You contribute. I always believed Latin was adequate for a gentleman. Greek is for theologians. It's the flawless comment, harmless, snobbish, and securely dismissive. Mr. Crawley, the retired magistrate with a face like a sharpened shoe, nods, observed Jenkins at the club last Thursday. Requested lemonade. Lemonade? A quiet gasp. Someone exhales through the nose. You move your head slowly. Inferior taste in beverages frequently precedes political liberalism. You've captured the room. For the moment. This is how men interact here. Not through concepts, but suggestions. Everything must be encoded, and the encoding is transmitted from father to offspring, uncle to nephew, instructor to anxious schoolboy. Previously, long past, you questioned your uncle why nobody ever communicated plainly in these spaces. He blinked deliberately and answered, because men who communicate plainly typically wind up on pamphlets. Since that moment, you've mastered the pattern accuse without accusing, concur without committing, and switch subjects before anyone experiences anything. The conversation transitions seamlessly to hunting. You haven't participated in years. Your targeting is terrible. Once you struck your own coat, but you nod along as someone narrates a pheasant incident so intricate it may involve time travel. Nobody challenges him. The narrative isn't intended to be trusted. It's intended to confirm identity. Right then, the door squeaks. A servant arrives with a tray, a decanter, 3 glasses and a dish of nuts, unsalted, because salt promotes thirst and thirst creates speech. You accept a glass brandy once more, just sufficient to warm the throat, not sufficient to release it. Talbot mentions something about the theatre once more, and you allow it pass by. You're observing the flames, hearing the grandfather clock tick beyond you. Every noise feels deliberate. Even your own pulse seems reduced in this space. And then someone mentions something almost genuine. My brother, Brimsby starts gradually. He's experienced a bout of melancholia, a silence more profound than the others. You detect everyone stiffen, just marginally. You contemplate your answer carefully. Ah, you state. The season's been exceptionally moist. It's flawless. You've recognised the statement, provided a reason, and redirected fault toward the climate, all without genuinely addressing the subject. Brimsby nods, relieved. This is your preparation at work, because a Victorian gentleman must be skilled in emotional avoidance. Not from meanness, but existence. Authenticity is hazardous. It opens doors you might not be capable of closing, so instead you present each other carefully wrapped gifts of meaninglessness and express gratitude for the wrapping. Subsequently, as you stand, brushing invisible lint from your sleeve, Talbot pats you on the shoulder. Fine conversation. You both recognize nothing was stated, but in this reality, silence is the most genuine form of regard. You withdraw from the parlour with a delicate balance of a man, stepping away from a conversational explosive that fortunately didn't detonate. The door clicks closed beyond you, dampening the fire's crack and the quiet coughs of men aging in silence. But your following destination is no less sacred. The smoking room. Not every home has one, but yours does. Hidden in the back, wrapped in dark oak panels, lit dimly by gas lamps and smelling like the inside of a tobacco seller's vest pocket, this is the single room in the whole house where a man may drop his guard slightly, not completely, but just enough to smirk at a witticism or lift an eyebrow when somebody says something mildly scandalous. You push open the door and inhale the heavy air. Smoke twists lazily upward, like rumours without consonants. The room is hushed, a soft rumble of conversation, the occasional strike of a match, the whisper of an inhaled drag. This is not a space for merriment. This is where truth gets suggested, never stated. You sink into a worn leather chair that's been sitting there since before the South African War, passed down like a character flaw. A servant walks over with a humidor. You study its offerings. Maduro, Corojo, Sumatra. You choose a gentle Havana, not because you enjoy it most, but because the stronger varieties mark the fingertips, and marked fingers imply manual work. He clips it with a silver cutter, the action swift and rehearsed. A burning match is presented, and you inhale slowly, allowing the smoke to rest in your mouth before releasing just enough to demonstrate refinement. A gentleman never exhales smoke like a locomotive. That's for sideshow acts and radicals. Mr. Ellicott sits opposite you, already 2 inches through his cigar, and exactly 4 sherries into the evening. He's the sort of man who's never lifted his voice, yet once persuaded an entire municipal board to prohibit outdoor meals on Sundays. He tilts forward. Have you learned about Calthorpe? Naturally you haven't, but you nod, only rumours. This is the secret to smoking room exchange. Act like you know everything, reveal very little. Ellicott lifts an eyebrow. Evidently he's taken up bicycles. Another silence. Bicycles. In this space, that term holds the gravity of upheaval. Bicycles mean liberty, mobility, unsupervised women, dangerous knees, and worst of all, perspiration. I imagine it was inevitable, you respond cautiously. He always did gravitate toward the contemporary. You take another pull, eyes drifting to the smoke circle forming above. Somewhere close by, a man swirls whiskey and grumbles something about pants becoming slimmer. In the smoking room, the world gets divided into 3. 1. Acceptable quirks, gathering snuff containers, wearing personalised socks. 2. Unacceptable interests, repeated trips to the British Museum. 3. Ethical ruin, plant-based eating, watercolours, handshakes with staff. Calthorpe, it appears, is wavering dangerously toward Category 2. Somebody coughs. Not an illness cough, a social cough. An opening. Lord Fenwick chimes in naturally. When my father first encountered a velocipede, he proclaimed it the devil's rocking chair. Everyone laughs quietly. You participate, not because the observation is amusing, but because it's an affirmation of status. Fenwick's father once possessed half of Surrey. The cigar heats your fingertips, not disagreeably, a mild burn, a reminder that you are permitted to appreciate this within limits. But even here, where the facades are thinner and the light is dim, the guidelines persist. Your posture must remain straight, ash must not drop, and above all, your smoke must never reveal your thinking. The atmosphere grows denser, more meditative. The aroma of tobacco mixes with the faint fragrance of buffed walnut and ancient disputes. You recline just slightly, enough to suggest ease, but never hunching. Hunching, even here, indicates failure. Opposite you, Mr. Tolliver plays with his cigar band, removing it slowly, carefully, as if revealing a mystery. Everyone understands Tolliver carries debts. Everyone pretends otherwise. That's the smoking room agreement. Acknowledge nothing, observe everything. He finally breaks silence. There's talk the Reform Club might start accepting men from commerce. Nobody reacts right away. Commerce, a term that tastes like ash, that suggests hands without gloves. Men who labour in offices with inkwells and account books. Men who create things other than dialogue. Lord Fenwick eventually says they'll be wanting clerks in the House of Lords next. A few soft laughs. Yours is measured, cautious, but your eyes flicker. You understand the world is shifting, groaning at the hinges like an ageing house. But here, in this room, such matters are only recognised through irony or symbolism. Ellicott crushes out his cigar in the ashtray, bone china decorated with fading roses. He does it with the grace of a man crushing a whisper. You can always identify the new types, he remarks. Too much stiffness in the collar, always posing questions. Everyone nods. A gentleman never poses questions, he implies. If he must discover something, he allows others to volunteer it freely, or else not at all. The servant returns to gather empty glasses. He doesn't utter a word. He doesn't meet anyone's gaze. He understands this territory isn't his. You give a slight nod, just enough to recognise his competence, not his humanity. He vanishes like a properly trained phantom. Another voice lower from the corner, Mr. Bexley, silent until now. My son, he states, composes articles. Everyone stiffens. That word, articles, floats in the smoke like a threat. On science, Bexley continues after a pause. You sense it then, the invisible redistribution of balance. Science is risky ground, too near to evidence, too near to concepts that might disturb the established hierarchy. Ah, you respond, the natural sciences I trust, not those theoretical ones. Bexley's lips twitch. He's examining weather. That's permissible. Weather is, well, British, harmless, indefinite. You save him with a careful redirect. We'll always require men who can clarify fog. Heaven knows the rest of us have endured it in silence. Soft, thankful, Bexley nods, his instant of near exposure safely redirected into a quip. That's what this room exists for. A location where you can suggest things without voicing them. A location where secrets are not admitted, but permitted to extinguish themselves quietly. The cigars diminish. Someone yawns, not too broadly, and consults his pocket watch. The hour is approaching 4, time to ready for the trial of dinner. The servants will be arranging the table now, positioning forks like infantry ironing napkins with enough starch to slice glass. You stand, extinguish your cigar with a final deliberate twist, and straighten your waistcoat. The others follow. Nobody says farewell. You simply depart in sequence of social standing, as determined by everything nobody ever clarified. But everyone always understands. Beyond the room, the air feels lighter, purer, but colder. You've uttered very little, but you've accomplished something very significant. You've communicated in the language of smoke, stillness, and implication. And in this society, that means you still fit. As the late afternoon glow seeps through the thick curtains, you proceed down the gleaming corridor, your footfalls hushed, measured toward the most perilous institution in a gentleman's daily routine. The club. Not the variety with dancing, certainly not the variety with entertainment. This is the gentleman's club, that grave temple of quietness, walnut panelling, and uniformed personnel who possess more secrets than any confessor. You're not here to be amused. You're here to exist visibly in a location where nothing must go awry. Your carriage leaves you on the stone steps of the Athenaeum, or perhaps the Reform Club, or Boodle's. It scarcely matters. They all operate by the same archaic, unwritten codes. The doorman opens the entrance with a nod. He doesn't grin. Grinning implies acknowledgement, and acknowledgement implies familiarity. That would be catastrophic inside. The scent of dust, port, and polished aspiration. Oil portraits of long-deceased vice-chairmen look down at you with the bored displeasure of men who once controlled 7 estates and now have nothing to do but linger in stairwells. You step into the lobby and halt at the front table. Here rests the armchair map, a small leather-bound volume where members may inscribe their name to claim a particular chair. Not all clubs permit this, but those that do enforce it. Like religious law, woe betide the man who occupies another member's armchair. You remember the incident in 73. A doctor knew money settled in Lord Bessington's regular chair. The resulting quietness lasted 2 months and indirectly caused 3 resignations. You examine the volume. Your chair, the third, left by the fireplace, is available. You ink your name in silent relief. Inside the reading room, the furnishings haven't altered since Wellington's era. High ceilings, dark carpets, chairs that groan ominously if one so much as contemplates impure thoughts. A blazing fireplace protected by a screen that may or may not have once been Byron's. You assume your position, open a copy of the Times and act like you're reading it. You're not here for information, you're here for presence. Other men arrive, hats are taken off, never suspended. Nobody talks. Coughs are permitted twice per hour per man. Throat clearing is disapproved of. Sneezing reason for removal. You once witnessed a man shown out for humming quietly. A servant walks past. You lift a finger, just one. He comes back moments later with a crystal tumbler of brandy and a small silver dish of salt. Salted almonds. You consume one, just one. Then you rest the spoon carefully atop the dish. This indicates moderation. At the far end, old Major Greaves is dozing, upright, eyes shut, yet somehow still evaluating everyone beside him. Mr. Hammond of the Colonial Office flips a page with a movement so gradual you question if he's reading or simply regulating his breathing to Victorian standard. Suddenly, a disruption. Mr. Peebles has shown up. You detect him before you see him. His boots squeak, and he utters a faint apology to nobody specifically. He's fresh, recently inherited, a tin fortune, doesn't quite comprehend that in this room, even apologies are regarded as too assertive. He moves toward the fireplace, your chair, but hesitates when he notices the name book, now shut. He wavers. Then, thankfully, he turns left and settles into a lesser chair near the staircase. Crisis prevented. Because here, chairs are paramount. Each one carries a history, a scent, a quiet impression pressed into it by decades of identical trousers. Occupy the wrong chair, and you're not just physically misplaced, you're spiritually banished. You glance down at your newspaper again, an article on tariffs. You don't comprehend it. You don't have to. What counts is that you're holding the Times, positioned in your armchair with your legs crossed at the socially proper angle, and everyone observes you doing it. You've now been positioned for 47 minutes. You've read exactly 3 lines of text, absorbed the scent of your tumbler, and watched the flame in the fireplace shift ever so slightly to the left. Time functions differently here. It solidifies like aspic, dense and faintly absurd. The club isn't a location to accomplish anything. It's a location to be observed, doing nothing skillfully. To the inexperienced eye, this is a room of inactive men, but to a Victorian gentleman, it's a chamber of silent transactions. Who's positioned where? Whose paper is folded sharply? Who sips their port with composure? And who gulps like a merchant at a tavern? Across the room, Mr. Renshaw lowers his monocle and commits a serious mistake. He starts to speak audibly. I say, Have any of you observed the new steam tram? Every head rotates, not toward him, but away from him. Exclusion by visual rejection. The most lethal of all club penalties. Renshaw withers, slightly conscious of his blunder. He withdraws into his cravat like a tortoise returning to its linen shell. Conversation, when allowed at all, is restricted to the stranger's room, a separate chamber filled with chairs engineered specifically to wobble. You have never stepped foot in it. Nobody with dignity has. Back in your chair, you extend toward the small brass bell at your side. One gentle tap, not a ring. Rings are for crises. A single tap is for a discreet refill. The brandy arrives moments later, just enough to moisten the rim of your glass and confirm your station in the liquor hierarchy. In the corner, Sir Altham is completing his daily custom, removing a single snuff tin from his pocket, opening it soundlessly, inhaling with the force of a sleeping ox, and then closing it in 3 measured clicks. Nobody responds. He's been performing this since 1846. It's become part of the structure. You look up at the large clock on the wall. 5 o'clock approaches. Soon it will be time to abandon your armchair. The dinner hour nears, and club protocol demands that nobody occupy a public seat during the transition from pre-dinner drink to full social performance. It's an invisible change, but everyone senses it. You stand slowly, cautiously, leaving a faint depression in the leather that says a gentleman occupied here. He neither slouched, nor spoke, nor blundered. Your footsteps resonate softly down the hallway as you pass the library, a room you've entered exactly twice and never intentionally. Books are to be possessed, not accessed. A gentleman's knowledge must be suggested, never exhibited. As you approach the cloakroom, you overhear a whispered remark between 2 "Did you observe?" Peebles' boots squeaked again. A sigh. Regrettable. These are the verbal annotations of your society, tiny condemning details exchanged like currency. Nobody here forgets a blunder, especially not one involving incorrect footwear. You gather your gloves, your hat, and your expression of indifferent superiority. A final look over your shoulder verifies it. Your chair remains vacant, undisturbed, its warmth yours, alone, now dissipating into the fabric. Because in the club nothing is truly yours except what you defend through habit, custom, and unspoken rule. As you step back into the street, the world feels noisier, more disordered. But inside your coat, your calling card case presses faintly against your chest. You have been observed. You have not been criticised. You have survived the armchair conflicts. Back home, twilight seeps in like an uninvited aunt, soft, insistent, smelling faintly of rain and roses. You're guided into the drawing room by your butler, who informs you in the briefest syllables possible that the mail has come. There it is, a small stack of envelopes positioned with care upon the silver salver near the decanter. A gentleman's post, unlike his viewpoints, must always be examined before dinner. That way anything explosive can be disregarded, and anything tedious can be delegated. You sift through the stack a note from your tailor routine, a catalogue of umbrellas, presumptuous, a hand-addressed letter on thick cream paper. Intriguing. And finally, resting like a cat who knows its influence. A folded corner envelope marked with a wax seal. You don't have to open it to recognise what it is. A courtship letter, but not a love letter. No, no. Victorian courtship is an exercise in indirect combat. Love may be the battlefield, but paper is the armament. You open it carefully. No tearing, no urgency. A man who rushes at letters surely rushes at emotions, and those are best managed with tweezers. Inside, a carefully calibrated note from Miss H. Farnsworth, written by her but likely reviewed by her mother. It mentions an upcoming garden luncheon, a recent charity auction, and strangely, a shared fascination with Mesoamerican artifacts. You raise an eyebrow. You've never discussed Mesoamerican artifacts in your life, but that's not the issue. The issue is, this is an opening maneuver. The kind of letter a young woman dispatches to a man of her station who might, in time, be persuaded to pay a formal visit to her family's greenhouse under the pretence of admiring begonias. You must respond. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but within 5 days. Anything quicker seems overly eager, anything later insulting. Your reply must achieve the perfect tone. Interested but engaged, available but enigmatic. You rise, retrieve your writing set, a heavy brass box containing your monogram stationery, a fresh nib, and a glass inkwell the colour of bruised plums. Now the performance starts. Dear Miss Farnsworth, not dearest. That's for widows and sisters. Thank you for your charming note. Charming. Safe, non-committal, like a golden retriever in a waistcoat. Regarding the luncheon on the 17th, I shall endeavour to attend, schedule permitting. Schedule permitting accomplishes 2 things. Implies you are occupied, even if you're not, and keeps you from being cornered under a pergola, discussing gardenias with a woman who may or may not believe in phrenology. You finish with your obedient servant, not too heated, not too distant. Then the most crucial part, folding the letter once vertically, then horizontally with the text facing inward, seal with wax, emboss your initials. The seal must be centered. A tilted seal suggests you're intoxicated, or worse, French. You place the letter in the outgoing tray. The butler will dispatch it by morning. You've played your role, and that's what courtship is, isn't it? A polite fencing match where the blades are letters, the parries are glances, and the fatal thrust is asking about someone's favourite composer. Too premature. You haven't lost, you haven't won. You've written just enough to remain in the game. You step away from the writing desk with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has neither disclosed too much nor committed to anything that might someday involve flowers, poetry, or feelings. In other words, a perfect Victorian correspondence. Now you prepare for what may be the most psychologically taxing portion of the courtship, the potential in-person encounter, to meet a lady properly, meaning not in the street, not in a shop, and certainly not without a chaperone. You must first navigate the protocol of the visit, and if you do choose to attend Miss Farnsworth's luncheon, the path ahead is a tightrope strung between a teacup and social destruction. First rule: never arrive early. Early indicates desperation. It suggests you have no appointments, that your entire day centres around gazing at violets and listening to someone's aunt misquote Tennyson. Second rule: never arrive late. Late means you're disrespectful, or worse, continental. You must arrive precisely 13 minutes after the hour, not 10, not 15. 13, that is the secret number of all successful courtships. Enough to seem fashionably delayed, but not enough to cause concern upon arrival. Your cravat must be crisp, your cuffs free of ink stains, and your shoes polished to a point where they reflect some, but not all of your surroundings. Shiny enough to impress, dull enough not to resemble a mirror salesman. A light bouquet acceptable, but only a few, selected by your manservant and wrapped in neutral paper. Too much colour suggests passion, too little poverty. You settle for white, lilac and dusty Miller. Bland, non-committal, and ever so slightly poetic. When you're introduced to the lady herself, you bow, not deeply, and make exactly one polite comment about the weather and one observation about the shrubbery. Then you fall silent. If she speaks, you listen, not too intently. That's forward, but not distractedly either. You nod once per sentence, twice if she mentions something charitable like sick children or orphans who paint. Do not, under any circumstances, compliment her appearance. Compliments must be triangulated. That is, you may admire her penmanship or her taste in upholstery, perhaps even her interest in ancient artifacts, should she insist on raising the subject again. But say nothing about her eyes, her figure, or her dress that would place you on the fast track to ruin, or worse, marriage. The ultimate objective is to suggest interest without demonstrating it. Let her wonder, let her worry. Let her consult her aunt, her diary, and her parrot before deciding whether you are the sort of man who writes poetry in secret or merely prefers gentleman's tailoring. And you. You leave the luncheon having eaten 1 cucumber sandwich, said 17 words, and tilted your head just enough during conversation to appear curiously unreadable. At home, you record the entire event in your social diary. May 17th, garden call, Ms. H.F. Moderately agreeable. Discussed Aztec pottery. Hostess served ginger cordial. Tolerable. You seal the book. Done. You have done everything expected and revealed absolutely nothing, which, of course, is the first law of Victorian romance. Never show your hand until you've memorised hers. You stand before your bedroom mirror again, bathed in the forgiving glow of gaslight, and prepare for the most delicate, most expressive, most fraught ritual of any Victorian gentleman's evening toilette, the grooming of the moustache, not the beard. Beards are for philosophers, German professors, or uncles in exile, not the clean shave. Shaving twice daily suggests vanity, or worse, perspiration. No, the moustache is the middle ground, the compromise between chaos and control. You examine it closely. It has survived your promenade, your club chair, and even Mrs. Farnsworth's subtle glances. But now it looks exhausted, one side rising slightly higher than the other, like an eyebrow with ambitions. You sit. A small wooden box is brought forth, lined in velvet, containing your grooming tools, combs of horn and bone, scissors sharpened like scalpels, wax imported from Hungary, and a narrow cloth for dabbing excess pride. First, the combing. You part your moustache, gently pulling out debris from the philtrum. You once read that Napoleon took 2 full minutes to comb his before battle. You, a peaceful man, take 3. No reason to rush greatness. The comb catches just slightly on the right side, a tiny knot. You wince not from pain, but from the implication. Knots suggest neglect. Neglect suggests distraction. And distraction well leads to opera tickets, overdue debts, and feelings. You reach for the scissors. Snip. A single hair floats down like a falling aristocrat. Graceful, useless, and no longer welcome. You don't breathe while trimming. One twitch and you risk imbalance, and moustache imbalance is social imbalance. Now the wax. You warm a pea-sized amount between thumb and forefinger. Too much and you look like an aspiring magician. Too little and your moustache wilts like overboiled asparagus. With gentle strokes you shape it, not curled, that's theatrical. Not flat, that's military. You choose the English dignitary style, lifted slightly at the corners, as if your upper lip is always considering a subtle joke. As you groom, you remember what your grandfather once told you. A man may fall in love, fall into debt, or fall from favour, but his moustache must never fall. He said this just before tripping over a dog and landing in the pond, but the wisdom still stands. Now comes the test. Symmetry. You lean forward, examining the curve of each side. Perfect moustache symmetry is rare, like an honest banker, or a subtle hat. But you strive. You always strive. Because a man's facial hair isn't just decoration, it's language. A handlebar moustache, arrogant. A pencil moustache, possibly French. No moustache. A terrifying sign that you might trust your emotions. Yours. Yours says, I read parliamentary minutes and keep my feelings in alphabetical order. A soft knock at the door. Your valet. Dinner in 30 minutes, sir. You nod. You do not speak. Words might disturb the alignment. You reach for the final touch, the moustache guard. Yes, a small metal device, curved like a smile, designed to shield your artfully groomed whiskers while you sip soup. You secure it in its velvet pouch for later. Never display it before the first course. That would be improper. The moustache guard should appear without effort, as though you scarcely recall its presence, despite owning one engraved with your initials in silver by a craftsman who also etched dueling weapons. You rise, moustache pristine, symmetrical, carrying subtle notes of wax, rose water, and triumph. There's a particular radiance in the gaslight now. a sparkle in your gaze, an elevation of your forehead. You're not quite smiling, but your moustache certainly is. Below. Dinner arrangements are in progress, and you make your way down like a gentleman conscious that his moustache has achieved its peak moment. You don't acknowledge the footman with a smile or gesture, yet your moustache handles the communication, twisted just sufficiently to imply you've encountered a provocative novel but decided to destroy it. You step into the drawing room where fellow gentlemen have assembled, lingering, processing, watching. Sir Talbot has shown up prematurely and committed the most unforgivable transgression conceivable. He hasn't groomed his facial hair, it droops faintly at the ends, one portion grazes his mouth. It's not severe, but here, in this realm of wordless conflicts and linen-based diplomacy, it is ruinous. You claim your position by the fireplace and place one leg across the other, knee atop knee, not ankle resting on thigh, which one might witness in a painter's studio or a Parisian bistro. Then you extract your moustache guard from your interior jacket pocket. Permit it to capture the firelight for an instant, deliberately prolonged, and rest it deliberately on your knee. Talbot notices it. You're certain he does. He adjusts his posture marginally, discreetly correcting the boundaries of his own abandoned curls. Regrettably tardy, my friend. You've already prevailed. Yet moustache maintenance isn't merely about pride. In Victorian England, it represents a virtuous deed. There are leaflets, genuine ones, claiming that facial hair encourages vitality, bravery, and logical reasoning. Some even propose that the British Empire's military achievements stem partly from the facial excellence of its commanders. Naturally, they never mention beards. No, beards are untamed, alien, masculine, antiquated. The moustache is contemporary. The moustache is disciplined. The moustache is dominion. Dinner is announced. You step into the dining room where flames dance like secrets. Everyone locates their position without instruction. It's an inclination like birds travelling in patterns or dukes preventing acknowledgement of baronets. At the table, soup is presented, transparent broth, delicate, with absolutely nothing that could attach to the mouth. Yet still you arrive equipped. With no fanfare whatsoever, you position the moustache guard onto your spoon. It's a narrow arc of burnished silver, shaped to nestle just below your nostrils. It protects the precious whiskers from moisture. You dine precisely, gracefully, with understated dominance. The gentleman to your left observes it and mentally commits to acquiring one. The gentleman to your right possesses one already, but misplaced it and now declines the soup completely. Talbot attempts to replicate your technique, bending over his dish and tasting with exaggerated vigilance. His moustache sags instantly. One moistened strand starts to deteriorate visibly before your observation. You don't celebrate, you don't grin. Your moustache accomplishes it for you. Following soup arrives meat, something baked, presumably covered in glaze. A gentleman's moustache shouldn't obstruct the intake of meat. This is where inadequate technique is exposed. Grease on the points, a calamity, meat lodged in the edges, an outrage. You handle the blade and fork like a swordsman. Precise, refined, no embellishments. Throughout the meal, the moustache stays reliable. It represents a declaration of discipline. Discussion moves around you, rumours, governance, a gentle argument over port varieties. Yet you stay controlled, your gaze tranquil, your forehead mildly elevated. Because the reality is a gentleman might stumble in conversation or in finances or in chess. Yet if his moustache endures, he remains a person of worth. And when the concluding course is removed and dessert emerges, something delicate, maybe syllabub or sponge. You carefully clean the perimeter of your moustache with your individual handkerchief, embroidered naturally, fold it once and return it to your jacket pocket. No fragments, no marks, no disgrace. You stand from the table unaffected, a monument of propriety. And as the gentlemen proceed into the neighbouring room for coffee, you create a modest impression behind you. Not of fragrance or noise or controversy, but of assurance, the variety that only wax and determination can generate. You step into the dining room once more, now as a visitor welcomed by the delicate orchestra of glassware, silver and anticipation. The dinner gathering has commenced, and while the cuisine may be satisfying, the genuine banquet tonight consists of manners where every morsel, every motion, every lifted eyebrow forms part of a wordless competition. A footman withdraws your chair. You don't acknowledge him. Acknowledging servants resembles praising the wallpaper, pointless and somewhat questionable. You nod alternatively, a measured, refined movement implying shared comprehension. He withdraws without noise. The napkin rests ahead of you. Linen monogrammed, moderately starched, you spread it with the elegance of a priest managing artifacts. No cracking, no waving, no treating it like washing, a tender opening, creased once across your lap. Not bib fashion. Bibs suit youngsters or the French. Your dining companions settle in. To your left, an elderly colonel with sideburns you could groom horses with. To your right, Lady Prunella, something or another, recognised for possessing precisely 7 lapdogs and 1 magnificent eyebrow. The soup comes again, and once more the spoon transforms into a platform. You recall the fundamental principle: always progress away from yourself. Spoon outward, not inward. Drawing the spoon toward your mouth indicates hunger, and hunger indicates vulnerability. You must pursue your soup like a gentleman who doesn't require it. You taste, not slurp, not cool, certainly not pause. Temperature isn't a consideration. The soup might scorch your tongue, yet better that than the humiliation of uncertainty. Lady Prunella tastes with flawless timing. You coordinate with her. Your spoons elevate and descend like paddles in a synchronized fleet of discipline. Subsequently arrives the fish. It comes with a particular fork. Narrow, curved, superfluous. You must employ it. You must also recognize which side to begin from, the left, and which bones to disregard. The minor ones. A gentleman never extracts bones from his mouth. Rather, you utilize the fork to nudge them inconspicuously to the edge of the plate. This, executed improperly, appears like minor operation. Executed properly, it resembles poetry conducted on porcelain. Discussion starts in subdued tones. Someone references the continent, someone else exhales at the reference of Italian opera. A third individual describes a disturbing experience with a mislabeled wine container. All entirely acceptable subjects. But you present the masterpiece of courteous conversation, a narrative about a dinner gone awry. I once participated in a supper where the host presented goose without mustard accompaniment. Astonishment, amusement. A woman releases her fork. You smile humbly, gaze lowered. You're succeeding. Then arrives the entree. Beef, presumably, or mutton with vegetables positioned for appearance, not nourishment. You consume gradually, fork in left hand, blade in right tines facing downward. No alternating. Only Americans alternate, and only uncivilized people pierce. Someone inquires about your perspective on the Eastern question. You incline your head, intricate, much like dining without a suitable oyster fork. The table responds with laughter. The colonel approves. Lady Prunella observes you with fresh admiration. You've expressed nothing, and yet you've conveyed everything. And as the footman retrieves your plate soundlessly, imperceptibly, you understand you've conquered the soup, the fish, and the beef without a solitary mistake. But dessert is approaching. And dessert is where gentlemen are destroyed. The instant the dessert spoon is positioned before you, you sense it, that collective stiffening of bearing around the table. Dinner might be conversational performance, but dessert is the final act, and countless a gentleman has stumbled on the custard. You examine the selections, their syllabub, trifle. Maybe a floating island if the cook is feeling ambitious. And then, most troublesome of all, steamed pudding. A concentrated, glistening thing that trembles like remorse. Your presented trifle. Excellent, controllable, it arrives. stacked sponge, custard, jam, cream. Your responsibility is not to savour it. Your responsibility is to manoeuvre it with a fork and spoon, the sole occasion in a gentleman's existence where two implements are allowed in the identical hand range. You employ the spoon to elevate the fork, to stabilise, not pierce, never pierce. The cream mustn't crumble. The jam mustn't spread. The sponge mustn't squeal. This is less like consuming and more like fashioning with chilled dessert. Lady Prunella obtains a portion of pudding and examines it like a nun evaluating a transgression. You observe as she removes a tidy corner, then touches the side with her napkin, not because it's untidy, but because that is what one executes. She addresses you and declares, quite distinctly, "I've never trusted raisins." You acknowledge as if she's revealed a sustained political belief. Absolutely correct. They're perpetually attempting to seem more significant than they are. It succeeds. She beams. The Colonel expresses amusement. Someone coughs with endorsement. The dessert stage is about gentle absurdity. No philosophy, no business, and categorically no digestion grievances. Even if the syllabub becomes bitter or the custard is seasoned like gunpowder, you will complete it with a peaceful expression and the dignity of a gentleman chewing a document. Subsequently arrives the coffee. It comes on a silver tray presented in miniature cups that require you to grasp them like a violinist with a delicate career. Sugar tongs are distributed around and you acquire 1 cube. 2 is excessive, none is severe. 1 is accurate. No milk. Milk suits children and invalids. You mix without striking. The quietness is sacred now. A few murmurs, a courteous chuckle, yet the rhythm decelerates. People arrange to withdraw to the drawing room or the study, or in the situation of the more animated gentleman, the billiard table. You pardon yourself with a gradual push of the chair, hands by your sides, not positioned on the table. Contacting linen after dessert indicates either intoxication or Presbyterian inclinations. As you stand, you abandon your napkin on the chair, not the table. Why? Because positioning it on the table suggests that you believe the meal is concluded for everyone, a misstep of the supreme order. You encounter the butler on your departure. He offers a small bow, 1 inch deeper than typical. This signifies your behaviour was witnessed and validated. You reciprocate the gesture with a flicker of the eye and a slight strengthening of the moustache. Back in the corridor, you inhale. You have accomplished it. You have endured a Victorian dinner. You have managed cutlery with moderation, avoided political dangers, addressed pudding with cleverness. And not once did you reference your own hunger. Because here, in this decorated realm of silver spoons and conversational duelling, consuming is not a satisfaction. It is an examination. And tonight you succeeded. The hour advances late, and though your stomach is filled with trifle and strain, you must now confront the next quiet challenge, sustaining the pretense that your body doesn't exist. Because the fundamental principle for any Victorian gentleman after dinner is never perspire. Never emit odour. Never confess to having physical functions of any nature. You withdraw to your bedchamber under the pretence of changing for evening reading or perhaps composing a brief emotionless note to a remote cousin. But what you're genuinely doing is arranging for an intricate performance of physical concealment. Your valet is already preparing the bath. You don't reference it that way, naturally. The appropriate terminology is taking water as if you're a withering plant instead of a gentleman who's been sitting in wool for 12 hours. The tub is compact, tin, shallow, and produces a sound like a failing kettle when contacted, the water lukewarm at best. Hot baths are still regarded with doubt in many households. There are physicians, actual documented physicians, who assert that hot water stimulates madness, fainting, and moral deterioration. So the water is tepid, and your decency preserved with a large towel suspended across the edge. You enter with vigilance, not for security, but for dignity. A gentleman never creates splashes. He descends himself as though entering a tomb, gradual, solemn, trembling slightly but expressing nothing. The soap is carbolic, red, severe, and smells like disinfected celery. You lather cautiously. No sounds of effort, no scrubbing noises. This is not a cleaning. It is a ceremonial purification, executed not to cleanse the body, but to confirm you are superior to it. You remember what Lord Mattingly once informed you during a winter escape in the Frenchman bathes for enjoyment, the American for wellness. But the Englishman bathes to prove that he can manage not to. You embrace that sentiment. This is not an extravagance, it's a ceremony of restraint. Your valet remains outside the entrance, listening for the gentle sound of the tail tin pitcher, which indicates you're prepared for the rinse. You distribute it gradually over your shoulders, permitting it to flow down your back like gilt on a bishop's vestment. You dry energetically, quietly, never with a display. Then arrives the body powder. Yes, because a gentleman never sparkles. A gentleman projects composure. And in the summer periods when your layers feel like you're being held by a damp sheep, body powder is your sole protection. You apply your chest, your collarbone behind the ears, not excessively. A cloud of powder is dramatic, but precisely enough to provide you that slight floral dryness, like a library in blossom. Subsequently, the linen renewal. Fresh drawers, fresh undershirt, all starched to within an inch of reason. The previous garments are gathered and transported away, never discussed again, like disreputable cousins dispatched to India. You position at the mirror. Your skin appears pale, pulled taut over cheekbones, exhausted of performing stoicism. But your hair is still positioned, your collarbone powdered, your scent subtly lavender with a trace of chalk. You've concealed every indication of effort, because in Victorian England, the ideal gentleman is frictionless. He doesn't make sounds, he doesn't leak. He moves through society like a properly oiled mechanism in tailored wool. And now you're prepared for your concluding act of physical defiance. A complete evening in company without perspiring a particle. Evening has completely arrived and the drawing room beckons. Not merely the room, but the company, the performance. You descend the stairs once more, immaculate and scentless, trailing not a fragrance but an implication that you're a gentleman unaffected by biology. You enter with ideal timing, neither earliest nor latest. Too promptly suggests eagerness. Too delayed indicates you are engaging in something unspeakable, like perspiring or applying a subsequent layer of hair tonic. Within, the atmosphere is filled with beeswax, polish, and somewhat stale lemon drops. The other gentlemen are assembled near the hearth. Their faces illuminate ever so marginally, not with perspiration, naturally, but the subtle radiance of enduring dinner, and the ladies positioned at the distant end, fanning themselves delicately. They are also restricted by unspoken principles. They must not illuminate, but they must gleam. You, however, must accomplish neither. You must seem glacially collected, even as the temperature climbs and your collar constricts like a debt collector's grip. A gentleman nearby pats at his forehead with a handkerchief, a gamble he receives. A sideways look from Lady Huntington, who fans marginally quicker. You seize the opportunity to reveal your handkerchief, not for patting, but for a casual adjustment at your cuff. A purely fabric-level modification. The room is intended to observe that you possess a handkerchief, not that you necessitate it. You claim a seat near the chess table, neutral territory, a secure location. To your left, a container of port. To your right, a vessel of drooping hydrangeas, their petals bending like abandoned apologies. The conversation shifts to the weather again, and as someone presents the observation, unseasonably warm for September, you permit yourself a single regulated exhale. This is your opportunity. Warm, yes, you state, but not intolerable, if one dresses with moderation. a sound of consensus. You've navigated the challenge, remarked on the heat, without conceding to experiencing it. That's an expertise. You stand gradually, not because you're fatigued, but to move about. A host must circulate. You traverse a group examining a recent charity ball. The expression "too much cologne" is murmured. You smile internally, understanding that your own fragrance, lavender with the slightest trace of tobacco, has been adjusted to vanish on entrance. In the corridor beyond the drawing room, you locate a mirror. You glance just momentarily, still collected, still powdered, still completely inhuman in your excellence, and you recall the reality. Physical discipline isn't about cleanliness. It's about status, to seem clean, collected, odorless. This is how the gentleman distinguishes himself from the worker, the merchant, the actor, even the clergyman. Your skin is as indecipherable as your letters. Your hands are clean not because you cleanse them, but because they have never required to labour. Even your fragrance, subtle, regulated, non-sexual, is strategic. You return to the room precisely in time for tea. Someone releases a teaspoon. It strikes on the saucer like a controversy. Eyes change, brows elevate, and you reach steadily for your cup, steady as a marble statue, and taste. The tea is hot, burning even, but your expression doesn't react. Your bearing doesn't deteriorate. You consume with the quiet elegance of a gentleman completely separated from his nerve endings. You are flawless, and that truly is the most draining thing a gentleman can be. It's nearly 10 o'clock. And the house has mellowed. The fire crackles reduced. Teacups strike less regularly. The activity has diminished, leaving behind the subtle scent of bergamot wool and tired dignity. But for the Victorian gentleman, even quietness is a performance. And as the evening transitions toward night, you must now participate in the quietest, most limited social ceremony of all, engaging with your servants without ever genuinely recognizing them. Because in your realm there is a principle more holy than proper posture, more essential than the soup spoon's orientation. The boundary between servant and gentleman must stay invisible, yet completely. You stand from your armchair and move into the hallway where the gas lamps flicker subtly, as if anxious. You detect footsteps ahead, gentle, rapid and regretful. A maid, youthful, probably new. She observes you and instantly looks downward, merging into the wall like a shadow with a mop. You don't address her, you don't acknowledge her, you don't even gesture. Rather, you gaze marginally beyond her. Not through her, that would be harsh, but beyond her, as if she were a piece of construction, too modest to notice because conversation establishes familiarity, and familiarity in this house is social destruction. You proceed walking. Somewhere a door creaks. A footman materializes in the edge of your vision, then disappears like a properly trained phantom. Your boots strike against the tile floor, not prominently, but sufficiently to remind the house that you are conscious, alert, and observing. You climb the stairs gradually. Each step is an occasion to exhibit calm command. And behind you, nearly soundless, follows your valet, Mr. Simmons, transporting your nightwear and a basin of fresh water. You don't regard him, but you understand he's there. When you arrive at your chamber, he opens the door for you, then positions the basin down on the marble-topped washstand. Not a word is traded. He arranges out your robe. He adjusts the pillow. He extracts your cufflinks with a delicateness normally allocated for baptism. And all of this is executed without direct eye contact. The implicit principle is evident. Your valet is your reflection. He must mirror you, anticipate you, but never burden you with the weight of his own humanity. But sometimes the reflection clouds. Tonight, for illustration, as he gathers your trousers, you detect a tremor in his wrist, scarcely there, but once observed. It is impossible to ignore. This observation is not for you to make. You are not meant to give it attention. Yet there is a tremor. Was it from the chill, from weariness, from grief? You contemplate asking a single quiet inquiry. But then you recall your strict etiquette. A gentleman must not trespass. A gentleman must not burden his servants with concern, because concern suggests sentiment, and sentiment suggests parity. Instead, you offer the utmost courtesy you can summon. You state plainly, "That will be all, Simmons." He hesitates, marginally longer than is typical, then bows, just enough to convey appreciation, not enough to imply closeness, and departs. The door closes softly. You are now solitary, with the bath's warmth, the soft cloth robe, and the strange, lingering impression of a man's hand shaking near your neatly folded vest. You exhale, nearly imperceptible. The space breathes with your quietness. Because even when no one is present, a gentleman must never use a loud voice, not even to his own mind. The fire in your hearth sputters low, casting long, wavering figures across the panelling and wardrobe. You stand at the wash basin, sleeves turned up, precisely halfway to your elbows, no further. Bare arms are appropriate for boxers and doctors, not for gentlemen. You begin your evening rituals, a quick splash of water to the face, cool, deliberate. Not a soaking, not a sharp intake of breath, just enough to cleanse away the day without exposing the man underneath. Beneath your robe is another waiting. Navy, heavily knit, marked with a monogram on the left breast. A present from your aunt, selected less for ease than for its deeper meaning. She once penned that a man's sleeping gown ought to convey structure, not self-indulgence. You often reflect on that as you secure the sash with 3 precise loops. You move to your writing desk, not to compose anything of substance, but to embody the pose of a man who writes. You open your ledger, uncapped, a fountain pen ready, and record a single sentence. Servants moved quietly today. You pause, mark quietly with a single line beneath. That suffices. Then, as always, you blot the ink, secure the cover, and lock the journal away. Your inner thoughts are so thoroughly screened, you would hardly recognize them exposed. Now begins the final routine of the night. Getting into bed without causing too much disturbance to the stillness. You turn off the wall lamps one after another, not simultaneously. That would be showy. The correct procedure is a slow descent into shadow until only the fire remains, flickering gently like a memory too inappropriate to voice. You turn back the bedclothes and inspect the pillow, crisp, scented, folded at the edge. A small square of lavender-scented linen sits on top of it, a cool compress, replaced daily, never acknowledged. You remove it, set it aside, and slide into the bed. Not a plunge, not a drop. You ease yourself down, as if under scrutiny, because in this dwelling, in this reality, you are always on display, even when you are by yourself. Your head settles into the pillow, not deep down, just enough. You lie flat, arms resting at your sides, legs straight, the appropriate posture of a man who is resting but never fully relaxed. And then, finally, you perceive it. The faint sound of steps outside your door, a member of the staff performing final checks. Securing windows, closing curtains, confirming that the head of the house is safely in slumber. You close your eyes, though you are not yet sleepy. In this hush, you review the day. The stride, the moustache, the dessert, the young woman, the shaking in Simmons's hand, all of it compressed into the soft whir of gaslight cooling in the tubing. You inhale through your nose, lavender, metal, coal dust, and ink, and you release it, but before rest comes. There is one last maxim you recall, the most crucial of all. A gentleman must never make noise while dreaming, because if anyone were to hear your deeper thoughts, your desires, your worries, your fatigue, they might realize a terrible truth. That beneath the formality and the quiet, you remain a man, and that, in Victorian society, is the most unacceptable revelation of all. Morning returns, as it must, silently, without enthusiasm, without seeking permission. You rise gradually, aware that your back resists slightly more than it did the previous year, but you ignore it, A gentleman may concede duty, debt, or a diplomatic failure, but never physical discomfort. The household is stirring, but just barely. Somewhere on the lower floor, a maid is polishing brass with vinegar and finely ground eggshells. Elsewhere, a footman is repressing a curtain tassel because the first effort lacked a definitive edge. You dress, you descend, you re-engage with the day. And instantly the sequence of small rituals of correctness starts again. You enter the hall, and there it is, the umbrella stand. You pause. The sky is dull, the paths are wet. Your shoes, polished last evening, will suffer. And yet, to carry an umbrella before the rain starts. That suggests you forecast the weather, and over-anticipation suggests nervousness. And nervousness is for clerks and literary figures, not men with personalised walking sticks. You bypass the umbrella. First hurdle cleared. Next is the headwear quandary. You have 5 acceptable options: the bowler, businesslike, the top hat, the Homburg, the straw boater, and the dreaded soft cap. For cricket and cricket alone, it is a Tuesday. You select the bowler. Practical, faultless, inconspicuous. Then gloves. White for dances, grey for morning, tan for country walks, black for funeral rites. You opt for brown leather, soft, well used, with just enough wear to imply long-standing respectability, but not so much as to evoke sympathy. By the time you have stepped outside, you have already navigated 6 unspoken regulations, and you have not yet spoken a word to anyone. You walk. The avenues are busier today. Coal wagons, carriages, a street vendor selling eels from a cart, 2 schoolboys skirmishing with their bags. You manoeuvre around all of it courteously, without making direct eye contact with anything. But then, an unwelcome moment. A stranger, well-dressed, seemingly respectable, approaches from the opposite direction. You have never met him, but your eyes connect for one fraction of a second, too long. He raises his hat. And now you are obligated. The unwritten code demands you acknowledge the gesture, but to what extent? A full removal, a 2-fingered touch to the brim, a slight inclination of the head. If you underdo it, you risk offence. If you overdo it, you risk prompting conversation. You choose the restrained brim touch and continue walking, but the interaction troubles you for the next 10 minutes. Who was he? Did you know him from the social club? Was he related to the Calthorpes? Will he report your coolness to Lady Farnsworth? Who will then conclude you are aloof and uncaring, which might in turn affect your inclusion on the guest list for Thursday's bridge supper? All this from a hat lift. This is the reality of living under the dominance of propriety. Every movement is charged, every nod must be calibrated, every exchange is a riddle, and no one shares the answers. Even staying still is a conscious act. If you pause too long by a shop window, someone might imagine you are genuinely interested in the merchandise. If you halt at a corner, someone might presume you are waiting. But, gentlemen, do not wait. They observe. You reach the public garden. It is mercifully empty, except for a gardener trimming something that once aspired to be a boundary hedge. You take a seat on a bench, cross your legs not too tightly, ease your gloves slightly, and take a breath. And there it is again, the demanding practice of appearing effortless. You sit alone on the park bench, the coldness of the iron seeping into your back through 3 layers of wool and dignity. A pigeon observes you suspiciously from the path's edge. Even the birds here seem conscious that a gentleman must never appear unoccupied, so you perform. Not obviously, of course, that would be common. But you angle your head at precisely the correct degree to seem preoccupied with thought. Thought. Not troubled, not sad, just profoundly, vaguely contemplative. Perhaps considering trade routes or Dante, or whether the hem of your trouser is falling a hair too close to the top of your boot. Across the grass, a nursemaid pushes a stroller. You do not look. Children in public are to be overlooked, unless they bow, in which case a quick, subtle nod may be allowed. Never smile. A smile directed at a child suggests tenderness. That is precarious territory. You check your pocket watch, not because you need to know the time, but because you need a reason to look down. 11:15. Still an hour before you must return home and pretend to read the fortnightly review. You rise from the bench slowly. There is a technique to this too. Standing too quickly suggests agitation or haste, or that your limb has fallen asleep. Too slowly, and you risk seeming infirm. Now comes the most fraught section of the walk home, the series of minor choices. Do you nod at the policeman? Yes, but with detachment. Do you cross the street to avoid the cluster of schoolboys playing cricket with a boot and half a broomstick? No. A gentleman walks through disturbances undisturbed. Do you recognise the grocer who bowed to you 2 weeks ago? No, not until he repeats the gesture. A gentleman never initiates a lower status acknowledgement. It is detrimental to the social order. As you approach your residence, you pass Mr. Gadsworth, one of those men who is perpetually outside, perpetually cleaning something, and perpetually ready for a chat. You prepare yourself. "Morning, sir," he calls out brightly. You touch your hat. Not a grin, just the hat. The sun has come out after all, hasn't it? You say only briefly, I suspect, and keep moving. The phrase is neutral, suitable for the weather, and concludes the exchange without causing offence. You have avoided the conversation without being remembered for the evasion. Inside the house, your butler awaits with a reserved nod and an envelope delivered by hand. "Sir?" A calling card, folded on the top right corner, left by Miss Farnsworth. You nod silently, but inwardly you flinch, because now you're obliged to reciprocate the gesture and find a fresh strategy to balance appearing interested without becoming ensnared in parlour games involving lace or poetry readings. You proceed to the drawing room and take out your red ledger, your book of social transactions, the real sacred text of the Victorian gentleman. You record the card, the folded corner, the hour, and the method of delivery. A return visit is required within 3 days, not 2. That would be too eager. Not 4. That would be scandalous. And then you recall her garden is often populated with bees. You are highly allergic to bees. This, of course, cannot be mentioned. You must instead contrive a prior obligation at the last moment, perhaps with a dental specialist. That excuse always elicits sympathy and never invites scepticism. You close the ledger, settle back into your chair and breathe out through your nose. The gloves are removed, the hat is placed carefully on its holder, and you stretch just slightly, clasping your fingers behind your back. You have successfully navigated another walk, another conversation, another coded message, all without letting your composure break. But truly, what an exhausting effort it is, this necessity of being inscrutable. The drawing room clock ticks with infuriating regularity. Each second lands like a mild reprimand. You sit beneath a painting of a river no one can name, feigning to read the Gentleman's Gazette, though your gaze has not progressed past the word cravat for 12 minutes. You are waiting not for an arrival, but for nothing to occur. Because at this hour, just following the midday meal, just preceding tea, a gentleman's primary duty is to uphold appearances without incident. This is the quiet hour of respectability. No invitations arrive, no tasks may be run, and if you speak too loudly or sigh too profoundly, someone may suspect you have excess time. That would be catastrophic. So you immerse yourself in the one activity every Victorian gentleman must master to sustain his position: financial pretense. You rise from your chair and approach the writing cabinet, polished walnut, secured with 2 locks. You open the drawer and take out the small black leather folder. Inside are documents, neatly organised, faintly yellowed and terrifying. Statements. Not bank statements. You have not examined one of those in years. These are invoices. From tailors, shoemakers, glove specialists, stationers, hair tonics, subscriptions, and the mysterious invoice from Barclay's exotic embrocations, which you dare not question. You spread them across the desk like a man dealing cards before a mystical consultation. Obligations everywhere, not overwhelming, not yet, but piled high like gentlemen at a formal meal. Leaning forward, full of expectation. You select the tailor's invoice. 3 suits paid for on credit, due last month. You cannot settle it, not now. To pay too promptly would draw scrutiny to your ready capital, and in polite society available funds are suspect. If you possess money, why are you not investing it in something? A rail line, a relative's dowry, a giraffe for the botanical gardens? So you engage in a different ceremony. You take out your fountain pen, your finest cream stationery, and begin. Dear Mr. L. Merriman, I write concerning your most recent invoice. You never use the word bill, too forceful. I find myself temporarily occupied with a matter related to an estate, necessitating a brief delay of settlement. You do not fabricate. You imply that is your birthright. You sign it not with your full name, but your initials, followed by ESC, that small, silly flourish that declares, yes, I owe you funds, but kindly remember my superior social standing. You fold the letter into thirds, seal it with wax, and deposit it into the box labelled correspondence, awaiting excuses. 1 complete, 11 more to go. Next is the bootmaker. You have not paid him since spring, but he is astute. He has begun writing his invoices on bright yellow paper. You suspect he wants the servants to notice. That cannot be permitted. You tear the yellow invoice in half, not to destroy it, but to lessen its visual impact. You will reply later, perhaps with an invitation to a mutual acquaintance's hunting weekend. That buys you at least a month. This is the grand choreography of Victorian finance, appearing affluent while quietly avoiding creditors. You must seem wealthy enough to be extended credit, but never so wealthy that people demand repayment. You glance at your watch. Time to prepare for tea. Another pair of gloves, a slightly less formal coat, and the correct expression. A smile that says comfortably solvent, even if your vest holds only a button and a borrowed pencil stub. Because in this milieu, being a gentleman is not about possessing money. It is about looking like the kind of man to whom money will eventually, somehow, find its way back. You slip on your second best coat, charcoal wool, subtly worn at the edges, and examine yourself in the tall mirror with a discerning eye. The material drapes correctly, the lapels curve as they should. The wear is almost imperceptible. Almost. But you tell yourself what every Victorian gentleman whispers silently into the glass. Assurance is credit. And with that, you descend the staircase to join the household for tea. The drawing room is bathed in late afternoon light, filtered through lace curtains starched enough to stand without support. A fire crackles. The tea service has already arrived. Porcelain cups, tarnished sugar tongs, a silver pot too small for genuine satisfaction, and naturally slices of sponge cake that taste like penance. You take your place. You do not pour the tea. That duty belongs to the hostess or a designated unmarried aunt, or whichever daughter has not yet succumbed to embroidery-induced despair. Lady Prunella, visiting again, somehow perpetually present, leans forward with a smile like a veil pinned too tightly. Do you take sugar? You do. 2 cubes, you say. 1.5. Why? Because 2 is extravagant, 1 is ascetic. But 1.5 suggests equilibrium, moderation of taste, moral restraint with a suggestion of softness. A man who comprehends both balance sheets and blossoms. She nods approvingly. The cake is offered. You accept the smallest portion. To refuse it entirely would be remarked upon. To accept a large piece would invite comment. But the smallest piece demonstrates you are agreeable, disciplined, and perhaps most crucially, not hungry. A true gentleman avoids any sign of hunger, not because he is satisfied, but because his appetites, like his emotions, must be strictly controlled. Conversation starts with cautious whispers, always a safe beginning move. Someone mentions a distant cousin's engagement. Another expresses annoyance at the poor quality of modern umbrellas. A man across the parlour suggests the Queen is being poorly advised by some Scottish influencers, a shocking claim only made acceptable by the flawless curl of his moustache. You observe, you grant a brief nod, you place your teacup back into its saucer without even the slightest sound, and then, abruptly, it occurs, the absolute worst possible social blunder at a tea service. Mr. Paddington brings up money, not subtly, not indirectly, but plainly. "I'm afraid I've had to hire a second junior assistant," he states, "since that railway investment performed less than admirably." The entire room falls silent. Even the tea seems to stop infusing. You do not show any reaction. You take a measured sip. You offer a smile as though he commented on the garden flowers. But internally your pulse races, like a carriage jolting over rough stones. Why? Because Paddington shattered the delicate pretense. He admitted to the real world. He spoke aloud the one thing that must only ever be hinted at. "You must mend it, I feel," you interject gently. "That particular investment is a matter of endurance, not immediate return." Lady Prunella agrees with a soft sound. Another guest offers a confirming nod. You have succeeded. You've redefined his financial setback as a philosophical viewpoint. The awkward moment dissolves. Mr. Paddington fidgets uncomfortably. You decide right then to never include him in any event that involves silverware, fine headwear, or reliance. The tea ritual resumes. You smile, you sip, you blot your lips with a napkin reserved for the highest uses. Inside, however, you reflect on your tailor's rising debt and the unwelcome yellow invoice. You maintain your composure. You simply remember, a genuine gentleman can be financially ruined in every way except for his outward presentation. You return to your private study just as the sun begins its slow descent behind the rooftops, casting long golden streaks across the flooring. It is the time when the world mellows, when the city's sounds soften and men retire to their deep chairs, spirits in hand, and pretend they are at ease. But you are getting ready for one of the most challenging social negotiations of male companionship. Not shared purpose, not close affinity, certainly nothing as vulgar as intimacy. No, Victorian male friendship is founded on mutual quietness, shared discipline, and the occasional neutral observation. Observations about boat races or trouser creases. You've invited an associate this evening, Mr. Langley. You have known him for many years. You attended the same boarding school, endured the same tedious summer on the same dreary property. He once loaned you a copy of a Roman text with a dried flower pressed inside. You never mentioned it. Langley arrives precisely 7 minutes past the designated hour. Correct punctuality. His hat is held in his hand, his gloves neatly folded in his left palm. No walking stick. Good. That suggests confidence in the current weather and in you. You do not greet him warmly. "Langley, good to see you." You shake hands quickly, formally, at a 45-degree angle. No clutching, no touching of the back. Your hands barely touch. Excellent. You motion toward the study. He follows without comment. He understands the unspoken code. Inside, the fire is burning low. The glass decanter is full. 2 armchairs wait at a slight diagonal, never face to face. That would imply confrontation. They angle slightly away from each other, permitting a conversation that can occur next to eye contact, but never directly engaging it. You pour the liquor, 2 fingers for each. You do not ask his preference. Asking implies curiosity. You simply know what he drinks, and he knows not to offer thanks. There is a period of silence, a lengthy one. You do not rush to fill it. That would suggest eagerness, and eagerness is dangerously close to revealing feeling. Instead, you sip. You let the room exist. Finally, Langley speaks. Parliament's a chaotic mess. Too much talking, not enough silence. You affirm. Silence is undervalued. There, a complete exchange. 3 sentences apiece, perfectly vague. You've established the appropriate mood. Langley shifts slightly, his shoe scraping the carpet. This is the indicator. He is about to mention something genuine, but concealed in layers of politeness and metaphor. He says, I suppose one occasionally considers the direction of things. Direction. You know his meaning. He means, what is the point of all this? Why do our lives feel like museum displays? Is anyone genuinely satisfied with this endless routine of formal clothes and light refreshments? But he avoids saying that. He says direction, and you agree. You reply, the key, I find, is to avoid looking straight at it, like an eclipse. Langley offers one quiet, dry chuckle. You've acknowledged the underlying emptiness gently, casually, without tumbling into it. This is the nature of true friendship. Not intense disclosures, not deep declarations, but shared abstract ideas and reflected comprehension. You stand to refill his glass. He does not stop you, and in that action, it is understood he trusts you, not with personal secrets, not with sorrow, but with his presence, his company, his brief sigh that lasted just a half-second too long. And you will not ask what troubles him. You will not push. You will do what men like you have always done. You'll sit and drink and remain silent and be everything he needs. The quietness continues, but it is no longer empty. It is richer now, like a perfectly aged dessert wine or the worn texture of your favoured leather chair. Langley leans back slightly. You mirror him, not through imitation, but through a mutual physical rhythm. This is the language of unstated accord, a subtle echoing that communicates we share an understanding, though we will never concede that there is an understanding to share. From the nearby entrance hall, the grandfather clock chimes 7 times. It cuts through the quiet like a bell at a formal challenge. Langley adjusts his shirt cuff. Do you ever consider, he asks carefully, whether any of this has meaning? He is wandering again toward the perilous edge of deep thought. Most men would show discomfort, but not you. Because you know the essential rule of Victorian gentlemanly association is that you must sometimes stare into the void together, but never leap. So you offer the lifeline. You reply, only when I forget the rules. Langley nods slowly. He understands. You are not rejecting his worry. You are confirming, yes, I wonder too, but the structure keeps us stable. The outward display gives us form. He takes another measured drink of the liquor, then observes the fire. The trouble with fires, he comments eventually, is that they always seem to know more than you do. You permit yourself the slightest upturn of the lips. They do. They've witnessed men trying to be themselves. That provokes a genuine laugh, short but honest, a gentleman's greatest reward. Then Langley makes an observation that is daring, unforgivable in less sophisticated circles, a reference to a romantic difficulty. No specific name, no context, but the weight of the statement lands like heavy artillery wrapped in fine cloth. You do not inquire who, you do not offer consolation. Instead, you say gently, some women leave quiet in their wake, others leave noise. You are fortunate if it is the former. Langley briefly shuts his eyes for just a moment. That is sufficient. You've acknowledged his pain without needing to discuss it, and in exchange, he will never bring it up again. He finishes his drink, places the glass on the table with deliberate care. Not because it is fragile, but because this instant is. You stand. He stands. There is no concluding handshake this time. That would invalidate the intimacy of the evening. Instead, he nods once. You nod in return. Until next week, unless the world ends. If it does, I'll bring the good bottle. He departs, and for a long moment you do not take a seat. You remain standing in the now silent room. The faint scent of wood smoke and citrus furniture wax lingering in the air. The shadows have deepened. The house feels older now, more like a stage. After the final performance, you return to your chair and you simply breathe. You consider Langley's unspoken confession, the sheer courage it requires to speak plainly in a world held together by polite ambiguity. You reflect on the fragility of it all, this intricate dance of holding back, this dominion of polite sighs and subtle nods. And then you do what any proper Victorian gentleman would do after such a demanding encounter. You open your red-bound accounting book and record, Mr. Langley, Thursday visit, 2 drinks, no breach of protocol. And in the margin, small and crooked, you write, Fire knows everything. Morning returns. But not just any morning. Sunday morning, the hallowed day, the day of perfect polish, the day when the week's moral failings are buried beneath stiff fabric, religious songs, and the faint scent of polish and self-righteousness. You stand before your mirror, arms held rigidly as the attendant pulls your collar into position, a gesture like the tightening of a noose. The Sunday collar is higher, more rigid, sharper than anything you've worn since Tuesday's accidental near decapitation by your cravat. But this is what God requires, or more accurately, what society demands in the name of the divine. Your shirt is flawlessly white, spotless. A single imperfection, a gravy stain, a nick from shaving, would be glaringly obvious across the seating area and would be discussed all week like scandalous gossip in a religious order. You lower your arms. The formal vest is next, then the long coat, the gloves, the black hat, the walking stick. Not because you have a physical need, but because on Sunday every gentleman must carry an item with no purpose except to show he has descended to the main floor. The housemaid has already buffed your shoes, the chef has already scorched the morning bread. The house smells of fine metal and citrus jam. You do not eat, not on Sundays. Eating expresses physical pleasure, and pleasure dilutes piety. You step out into the cool morning air. London is quieter, though not silent. Carriages still clatter and street sellers still murmur, but somehow muffled, as if the entire city is trying to censor itself. At the corner of the block, the church bell calls. You walk slowly, never quickly. Quick walking suggests enthusiasm, and enthusiasm, particularly for spiritual salvation, is unrefined. Your church, St. Basil's on Hanover, is stoic and smoke-stained, its doors always slightly ajar, as if the Almighty himself were too polite to deny entry. Inside, the air smells of old velvet and unspoken disapproval. You take your designated seat, row 3, right-hand aisle, not too prominent to appear arrogant, not too distant to seem indifferent. The organ begins to play softly. A young boy coughs. You slightly lower your head, not to pray, but to avoid the gaze of Lady Barstow, who is known to utter her prayers loudly enough to be heard by both God and the political figures in the area. The sermon begins. It focuses on self-control. It always emphasizes self-control. You know the exact content. Before the preacher even speaks, he discusses responsibility, discipline, and the dangers of self-indulgence. He warns against conceit, betting, immoral novels, and sweet liqueurs consumed after dark. You listen appropriately. You nod during the planned rhetorical pauses. You hum the religious songs without moving your lips because church is not about sincere faith. It is about a public display. It's the weekly presentation of goodness, and every gentleman must perform as if he is not performing at all. As the preacher concludes, you observe the people around you. All the men are doing the same thing, sitting perfectly still, legs precisely crossed, hats on their laps, hands clasped. You notice one unfortunate individual nodding off. He will be publicly slighted at the next Thursday Literary Society gathering. The final song is sung, the final blessing is given. You rise with everyone else, neither too quickly nor too slowly. You walk out into the churchyard. It is now time for the customary Sunday walk. You move slowly down the gravelled paths, surrounded by other gentlemen and their partners, all floating in a haze of bright colours, perfume and social pressure. No one mentions the content of the sermon. That would be too earnest. Instead, they whisper about garden plants and house maintenance. A small child drops his prayer book. No one reacts. He retrieves it. His father taps his ear lightly with a glove. Social equilibrium is restored. This is Sunday, a day of quietness, set routines, and subtle rivalry. And it is only just beginning. After the church walk comes the Sunday calling, a series of brief visits, not unlike a military strategy, only with more small pastries and fewer visible injuries. You adjust your hat, smooth your gloves, and prepare your expression for the day's second public presentation. First, the Chadwicks. Their main parlour always smells of flower scent and old currency. Mrs. Chadwick greets you with a smile that somehow manages to critique your necktie without saying anything. Mr. Chadwick is already dozing in his chair, pretending to read a religious pamphlet while secretly watching the small bird in its cage. You discuss the weather, the preacher's questionable headwear, the shocking softness of contemporary religious music. You stay for exactly 12 minutes. Any longer suggests neediness, any less suggests rudeness. Then it is off to the Fairchilds. Their unmarried daughter, Miss Eloise, offers you tea with visibly nervous fingers. You accept with a nod so slight it might only be noticed by carefully observant creatures. You do not compliment her outfit. That would be inappropriate. But you also do not fail to observe it. That would be an insult. Instead you say, "Seafoam green is a bold shade for this time of year." She blushes slightly. Her mother smiles broadly. You have managed to say everything and nothing simultaneously. Perfect. The discussion shifts to appropriate Sunday leisure activities. Someone suggests a game of chess. Someone else murmurs about sewing. You offer gently, "I find Sundays are best reserved for quiet reflection and ensuring one's linens are properly starched." Laughter follows, genuine laughter, the kind that communicates, "He is witty, but poses no threat." You have won the visit. You depart, back on the thoroughfare. Your shoes crunch the stones as you head home. The sun has moved higher. The aromas of roasting meat drift through the air like a comforting public offering. But you do not partake. Not yet. Not until the clock indicates 2 o'clock. Instead, you enter your study, remove your gloves, and open your Sunday reading. Every gentleman possesses one. Not scripture, although it may have that appearance. Not light fiction, unless it is morally uplifting or extremely depressing. Your Sunday book is a large volume that makes you appear intellectual without prompting questions. For you, it is the collected speeches of a Lord Shaftesbury. Its binding is pristine, its pages gilded at the edges. Perfect. You read 3 pages, or rather, you gaze intently at 3 pages while contemplating roasted root vegetables. When the clock strikes 2, you stand. The dining room awaits. Sunday dinner is a serious ritual. No jokes, no personal stories. Just roast beef, potatoes, boiled root vegetables, overly cooked green peas, and a dessert so heavy it could potentially be used as structural support. You eat slowly, napkin on your lap, fork in the left hand, knife in the right. No audible eating, no audible breathing, no added seasoning. Conversation, if it happens at all, is restricted to things that have already passed, ideally at least 3 days prior. After the meal, you retreat once more to the study. This is when true Sunday relaxation begins. You recline. You unfold the newspaper, being careful not to create a loud crinkling sound. You allow your eyes to scan the headlines. Colonial territory expands. tea prices remain steady. One man arrested for laughing during service. And then, just for a brief moment, you permit yourself the greatest of all gentlemanly Sunday indulgences. You remove one of your shoes. Yes, very quietly, just the left one. You wiggle your toes inside the sock, sigh soundlessly, and feel almost human, but only for a fleeting instant, because even on Sunday, even when alone, a Victorian gentleman must never appear excessively at ease. It is Wednesday evening now, and you are preparing for the one event in the week more perilous than political debate, more complex than morning dress, and more mentally tiring than a polite game of croquet with in-laws. The Gentleman's Social Club. Not the kind of club involving dancing or loose behaviour. No, this is the sacred domain of high ceilings, hushed tones, and smoke so dense you could carve your initials into it. A proper Victorian gentleman's club is a stronghold of masculinity filtered through dark wood and social anxiety. You dress with extreme caution, not too luxurious. This is not a public show, but not too simple. This is not a casual appointment. Your vest must subtly suggest wealth, not announce it. Your tie must imply you are capable of tying it yourself, even though you never would. And your shoes, they must shine just enough to reflect the lamplight, but not enough to reflect your personal insecurities. You arrive at precisely 8 o'clock. Early suggests desperation. Late is offensive. The doorman greets you with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Not your name, never your name. That would be undignified. You nod back almost invisibly as if to say, yes, I am expected, and no, I will not engage in anything noteworthy. Inside, the stillness wraps around you like fine cloth soaked in fine liquor. Every surface is either wood-cured leather or older than your grandfather's earliest memories. You step onto the main hall carpet, woven in 1802 and rumoured to contain the remains of 6 former members who expired during formal arguments. The smoking room is to the left, the reading room to the right. Directly ahead, the beverage station, empty, yet always overseen by some silent attendant who anticipates your drink before you utter a word. You select the reading room. It is the safest starting point. You pass a bronze bust of Lord Wellington with a noticeable crack across his nose and a single glass eyepiece wedged into his left eye socket. No one knows who placed it there. No one dares to remove it. You sink into a chair that has survived 5 changes in monarchy and 3 revolutions. It groans softly. In protest or acceptance, you cannot determine which. A server appears. "Your customary selection, sir." You nod. Moments later, a glass of fortified wine appears on the armrest like an obedient spirit. Across the chamber, other men read silently. One man rustles a page of the newspaper. Another sighs once, then visibly recoils at the sound. Talking here is permitted, but only if you are at least 60 years of age, hold a noble title, or have recently become a widower. You qualify for none of these tonight, so you maintain silence. But the quiet is misleading. Beneath it swirls political manoeuvring, rumours, competition, and thinly veiled disdain. You pretend to read the major newspaper, though your gaze drifts to a nearby table where 2 older gentlemen are engaged in a game of chess, so protracted it has entered its 3rd week. No one dares to intervene. Chess at the club is sacred. Each move is barely whispered, each piece handled as if it were priceless china. Onlookers lean in, nod once, then lean back, as if deeply affected by the profound elegance of a pawn's journey toward its goal. You sip your wine. It tastes of dried fruit, extreme patience, and mild disappointment. This is what you have prepared for. Years of polite affirmations, of learning to convey entire pages of feeling through a subtle facial expression, of mastering the skill of being fully present while appearing completely detached. And just as you begin to question if this is all a massive waste of cushioned time, someone clears his throat loudly, heads turn slightly. A man near the fireplace is about to speak. You prepare yourself mentally. Something is about to occur. The man by the fireplace is Sir Percival Haddon, a local noble and the owner of one of the most impressive examples of facial hair ever to defy gravity. He stands deliberately, like a church structure emerging from the morning fog, and clears his throat again. Everyone leans back slightly, not out of interest, but in readiness for the inevitable lengthy discourse. Sir Percival speaks only once every 2 weeks, and never in sentences fewer than 70 words. "Gentlemen," he begins, "it has been brought to my attention that the wall coverings in the Eastern Reading Nook have, over the course of the preceding 3 financial quarters, begun to exhibit a degree of separation which, though initially minor and possibly attributable to minor shifts in the room's atmospheric condition, has now reached a stage I would characterize as both noticeable and, dare I say, slightly inappropriate." You conceal a subtle grin. "This is precisely why you came." Sir Percival's speech unfurls like a government document, filled with qualifying phrases, references to textile history, and 3 quotes from ancient poets, none of them relevant. He never names names, but everyone knows the target is Lord Withersby, who donated the wallpaper in 1871 and insists it was imported from France. It was not. The room does not erupt in applause. That would be unrefined. Instead, there is a serious moment of quiet, followed by a coordinated sipping of liquor. A gentleman's standing ovation. Sir Percival sits. Order is restored. You rise, careful not to disturb the valuable carpet, and withdraw to the smoking room. It is darker in here. Lamps are low, the air is amber-tinged, and there is the faint hint of burnt spice from someone's unique cigar choice. This room is where personal reputations dissolve and settle like fine dust. You join a small group near the window. One man brings up the Queen's recent garden party. Another mutters about his railway stock holdings. You offer a shrug and a quiet sound, and it is entirely enough, because the true social currency here is not communication. It is emotional containment. The person who reveals the least wins the exchange. Someone introduces the topic of the new electric illumination being tested in the city centre. "Disgraceful," says Colonel Winthrop, polishing his glass eyepiece. "Soon we'll be roasting in our own lights like holiday birds." You nod wisely, though you secretly welcome the idea of not tripping over the spittoon containers in the shadows. A disagreement begins to form, slow and courteous as a slowly boiling pot of water. Gas versus electric, steam versus common sense, embracing change versus being left behind. You excuse yourself before the conversation reaches the point of personal anecdotes, when someone will inevitably tell a second-hand story involving an important person and a melted electrical cord. Back in the main hall, you pause beneath a painting of the club's founder, Lord Catamole, who once stated that a gentleman's greatest accomplishment is managing to spend an entire evening without expressing a single definite opinion. You smile faintly. You have just achieved that very feat. It is almost 11 now. Time to retrieve your coat, offer the attendant exactly 1 shilling, and disappear into the foggy street without leaving any trace of controversy behind you. Outside, London breathes more heavily. The gas lamps flicker, the hired carriages rattle past. Somewhere a dog barks with the sound of someone who has never received an invitation to any club. You walk home, hat tilted low, shoulders straight, your inner self filled with a quiet satisfaction. Tonight you are every inch the perfect Victorian gentleman, measured, composed, utterly inscrutable. And tomorrow you will repeat the entire performance. Morning again, and you are not entirely sure what day it is until the personal servant brings in the visiting cards. That is the reliable sign. Stacked like a formal pronouncement, spread out like a collection of duties. The visiting cards are arranged on a silver tray as if awaiting a final judgment. thin, rectangular tokens of social debt. Each card conveys a message far deeper than any letter. I observed that you were not at home. I made the required effort. Now you owe me an equivalent visit. You exhale slightly. It is Thursday, and that means a series of social calls, visits so brief they could be timed with a kitchen timer and so loaded with unspoken rules that entire guides have been written on the exact tilt at which you should rest your hat. You have no particular desire to visit the Mortimers or the Fairchilds again, or heaven forbid the elderly Lady Voss who insists on giving you brandy-laced gelatin and asking if you are still morally upright, but your personal card has already been deposited in their silver trays. And in Victorian society, a card left is a debt that must be repaid. You dress for daylight social manoeuvring, not as formal as Sunday, not as relaxed as Tuesday's home clothes. Your hat is freshly brushed, your cane chosen for its stylishness, not its practical use. Then comes the real minor crisis. Which gloves to wear? White implies a high degree of formality. Grey suggests respectability. Tan is seen as stylish, but bordering on scandalous. You select grey with a white lining. Just enough flair to show attention, but not so much that anyone might think you actually enjoy the process. You step into your private carriage, not to drive yourself, of course. You have not handled the reins since the unfortunate top hat incident of '78. You simply nod, and your driver begins the route. First destination, Lady Wexley's residence. The butler admits you with a formal sound so refined it might as well have been a warm welcome. The drawing room smells of furniture polish and antique tension. You are seated before you have a chance to speak. Lady Wexley enters 5 minutes later. This is her standard move to assert dominance. You pretend not to notice the delay. "Mr. Fairchild," she says, getting your name wrong yet again. "How delightful of you to drop by." You smile. You do not correct her error. You simply comment on the small, flowering plants in her window. She informs you they are failing due to too much foreign air. You politely suggest prayer. The clock moves forward. After precisely 15 minutes, you stand up. She pretends to object to your leaving. You pretend to reluctantly move toward the door. The footman releases you with the exact same terse sound. A single engagement complete. You check the notations in your pocket journal. Indeed, you carry one. Every man of quality maintains one. A slender, leather-bound volume itemizing your social obligations. Time dedicated, compliments extended, and minor social offences given and received. It reads like a secret agent's memoir, only with a greater mention of confectionery. Your second destination, the Davenports. Their residence is contemporary, illuminated by gaslight and tiled, bearing the subtle scent of advancement and fresh wealth. Mr. Davenport is, predictably, absent. Mrs. Davenport greets you with barely contained anxiety, her young child wailing somewhere beyond an adjacent entrance. You remark upon the bronze stand for the umbrellas in the entry. She brightens as though you praised her fertility. Tea service commences. The threat of crumbled biscuits is noted. You sip delicately, your small finger elevated just enough to communicate, "Yes, I am evaluating you," but kindly. Before departing, you make an inquiry regarding her relative's joint inflammation. She possesses no such relative. She expresses gratitude nonetheless. You categorize the visit as a success. This, after all, defines the interaction. Your next stop is the Thornbury property, where the door goes unanswered because no one resides there currently, and this truly is ideal. You offer your visiting card to the housemaid, ensuring its placement face up on the silver platter near the threshold. You refrain from adding any written message that might suggest undue familiarity, reserving that solely for declarations of sorrow or marriage proposals. The maid inclines her head. You return the gesture. The door shuts. Excellent. You have fulfilled the necessary duty without conversing with anyone. This, naturally, is recognized amongst refined men as the most efficient form of visit. You record it in your ledger with a small flourish. 3 more calls, and you will have completed your obligations for the week. As your hired conveyance rattles toward the subsequent appointment, you observe the streets of London. A moving display of underskirts, chimney stacks, and loud newspaper vendors. A lady in a deep purple hat crosses your path and offers a sideways look, which you conscientiously pretend not to notice. Direct visual contact from a moving vehicle. Scandalous. You next arrive at the Lemworth family home. A servant directs you into a reception area cluttered with lace mats and the faint smell of weak rose water. Miss Lemworth herself welcomes you, attired in lace so starched it could be mistaken for light protective gear. She is positioned at the instrument, performing a melody so tentative it sounds as if the piano keys are resisting her touch. You praise her musical aptitude. She shows a predictable flush of colour. Her mother smiles widely. Tea is brought in and arranged with the same profound respect one might reserve for a religious artifact. You swallow, you smile, you ask about their domestic cat, though you have never seen it. The discussion inevitably drifts to the climate once more. Always the meteorological conditions. That secure, perpetual, perpetually unstable subject that Victorian society relies upon like a support crafted from vapour. You mentioned the light rain recently. Mrs. Lemworth agrees it was the type that damages both footwear and reputations. That serves as sufficient stimulation for one visit. You rise, offer thanks, execute a bow, and retreat with the quiet grace of a phantom who regrets having been polite. Now, for the final stop. The most challenging type. A return visit. You see, earlier in the week, Sir Edwin Pallister left his card at your residence, and not merely a standard card. He left one with a corner deliberately folded over, indicating his personal presence and therefore expecting you to reciprocate. This is beyond ordinary social courtesy. This is a skirmish of etiquette, an unspoken strategic game where every move is charged with meaning, social position, influence, and perhaps even romantic insinuation. If the card had a different edge folded, which it did not, but it might one day, you reach the destination. Sir Edwin receives you in his personal study, which has the aroma of cured leather, pipe tobacco, and historic disapproval. He directs you toward a chair. You position yourself precisely 2 inches from the edge, demonstrating attention without desperation. You discuss the latest proposed law in the legislative body. You both register opposition, naturally. You, based on principles of custom. He, based on principles of resentment. Your tones align, but your rationales do not. He mentions his hunting companion. You feign recognition of the breed, and just as you anticipate the visit concluding peacefully, he offers a subsequent measure of fortified wine. This is a calculated risk. 1 drink is proper decorum. 2 suggests closeness. If accepted, you are deepening the connection. If declined, you risk offence. You accept the offering. You consume it slowly. He nods once, and in that single affirmation resides every layer of Victorian male camaraderie, confidentiality, scepticism, and fulfilment. The visit concludes. You have prevailed. You return home physically drained but socially impeccable. You hand your journal to the footman, who secures it in the strongbox. Tomorrow you will receive additional cards and repeat the process. Because in this environment of finely pressed fabric and unspoken realities, a gentleman's silence conveys more than 1,000,000 letters ever could. It is Sunday morning, and for once you awaken without a schedule. No visits to conduct, no facial hair tips to refine, no hand coverings to categorize by emotional shade. Merely the quiet sound of a household quietly functioning beneath your room. The housekeeper stoking the morning fire, the footman muttering Latin condemnations at the footwear, the maid rattling the tea tray with the subtle aggression of a Victorian dawn. You remain in bed slightly longer than is proper, gazing at the decorative ceiling above as if it holds the solution to the unspoken inquiry in every gentleman's mind. What exactly is my purpose now? Because here is the undisclosed truth no one ever shares. After all the ritual, the honour, the routines and customs, existing as a Victorian gentleman is, quite honestly, utterly draining. And more than that, profoundly, deeply isolated. Not the isolation resulting from emptiness, but the isolation resulting from constant observation, judgment, analysis, measured by the shape of your trousers, the curvature of your walking stick, the speed of your liquid consumption. Every single act is a communication, every quiet moment a decision. You eventually arise, attire yourself with minimal fuss, still 3 layers naturally, and descend for breakfast. Today it is curried fish and rice. Yesterday it was spiced kidneys. Tomorrow likely poached ovoids arranged like disappointed religious figures. But today, the comforting warmth of fish and grain reminds you of the sole, genuine pleasure in a gentleman's existence, predictability. Because while the regulations may be frustrating, they are also stabilizing elements. They maintain your upright position in a society spiraling toward instability. Steam-powered trains, electrical illumination, women requesting academic qualifications. Each custom you observe is a line drawn in the sand against disorder, and today the custom is contemplation. You withdraw to the study with a slender volume of poetry and the daily publication folded just so. Your seat offers a low sound, a fire whispers softly nearby. The precipitation has commenced once more, a gentle, barely audible drizzle that seems to apologize for its intrusion. You open your ledger, page upon page of impeccable handwriting. Names visited, documents left, accolades delivered, clothing worn, conflicts avoided, 1,000-minute tactical moves, manoeuvres of polite combat. You pause on one specific notation. Thursday, March 14th, complimented Miss Lemworth's instrument. She flushed. You smile, not because of any romantic interest, not because the music was impressive, but because for one brief moment you were not performing a role. You were simply yourself, still wrapped in layers of formality, yes? Still concealed behind 3 inches of vest and soaked social shield. But something authentic passed through the gaps. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the entire objective. Not flawless execution, not pureness, not dominance, but enduring in a world that demands a performance without allowing yourself to become merely the costume. You close the ledger gently, as if too much honesty might cause it to fracture. The fireplace crackles. Rain streaks the window pane like tears from a sky too proud to weep. Outside, the world continues, rattling horse-drawn carriages, shouting flower vendors, chimneys that release more smoke than the affluent men who pay to conceal them behind elegant window coverings. You stand up. Today you will take a stroll, not to be seen, not to elicit admiration, only to recall that the world extends beyond drawing rooms and fortified wine, and that not everything polished is authentic. You walk past the hat rack, selecting the item with the most flexible edge. No hand coverings. You step outside into the grey silence of a London afternoon. Canopies blossom like quiet flowers surrounding you. The atmosphere carries the scent of wet stone and processed tobacco leaf. You walk past the private club, and for the first time in numerous months, you do not enter. No requirement to demonstrate your refinement with flawless posture and calculated silences. You pass a baking establishment, a genuine one, not a supplier to anyone bearing titles or cosmetics, simply a place of commerce, a counter, and the warm, magnificent odour of yeast and sugar. You purchase a pastry, consuming it while standing in the thoroughfare like a harbour worker, sticky fingers, no cloth, just you and the rain and the rare sensation of doing precisely what you desire. It is minor, but it is sufficient, because here is what they never mention in guidebooks of proper conduct or instruction manuals for gentlemen or the self-satisfied journals of minor nobles who never had to handle a chamber pot in their lives. Being a Victorian gentleman is not about rules, it is about suppression. You develop the ability to experience emotions without displaying them, to desire things without asking, to exist as an assembly of contained edges, hoping someone will eventually comprehend the subtle implications. And when they do not, you persist, because even the most rigid neckwear cannot entirely suffocate a spirit. By evening you return home damp but strangely peaceful. Your footman notices the sweet crumbs on your sleeve, but remains silent. You give a slight nod. The lamps are illuminated. Your accustomed seat awaits. The ledger remains closed. Tonight you will not assess your virtue in terms of social calls or posture. Tonight you will take your tea slowly, permit your foot coverings to droop a fraction too far, and for the first time all week, inhale as if completely unobserved. Because perhaps the strangest regulation of all for a Victorian gentleman is recognizing when to disregard one. And now, esteemed listener, you may release all of that tension. Let the stiff collars loosen, the rule books close, and the light from the oil lamp gently fade into a soft, indistinct glow. No further exchange of cards. No more spoons arranged according to moral standing. Only you and the quiet. Allow your breathing to settle like a gentleman's exhale after an extended day of politeness. You have traversed the hazy lanes. You have tasted the spirits. You have outlasted countless unwritten regulations. And now there is nothing left to establish. You do not need to commit glove colour codes to memory or recall who avoided eye contact first at the club. None of that holds relevance here. All that remains is stillness. Imagine yourself back in that leather seat, fire burning low, the sound of the clock matching the rhythm of your internal pulse. You have done well. You have survived a world of perpetual expectations with your inner self preserved beneath all the crisp fabric and silk. And now, nothing more is required from you. No expressions of respect, no need for discussion, no facade, only repose. So take one final, deep inhalation. Let the mist drift across the paved stones. Let the gas lights flicker and the tea become cool. You have earned your tranquility, dear gentleman. Rest well.